Oh.
I'm probably more distracting than anything. So it's on my rocking and stemming and fidgeting. Oh, I think we're live.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're live here. We we just got off of a very challenging,
How did that go?
somewhat intense stream with what's her name,
Lav, yeah.
Ephemeron, and
Femoid or something? Is that what she went by?
yeah,
Femoid? Yeah.
Femeroid, and she was talking about feminist. She's a feminist and talking about femininity. So it was a good segue into the conversation we hope to have today about men,
Yeah.
masculinity,
I,
and role
Woo!
models, and even what do role models even mean. I've been
I,
thinking about that, and I'm not sure I've even used role models or what I'm supposed to do with them. So we're
I
going to get
don't
into all
think I
that.
have either. That's why I thought that was an interesting question whenever it came across it the other day. I just like as a hypothetical kind of thing. I was just like, I never really thought about that as being like about people that I would model myself after or try to be like, but like I just keep hearing this constantly in media about how like there's no good role models for young men. There's no good like what are young men supposed to who this is look up to? That's why of course they say Jordan Peterson is kind of like this father figure to so many young men and everything like that. And I mean I get it. It does seem like there's a definite dearth of I don't know
It,
just yeah.
do we need role model? Like, do you need a role model to be a good person, or can it come?
I don't know.
Like, I feel like
I don't
I
know.
don't know where I got mine from. I mean, I grew up Catholic. I always thought maybe some of my morals just came up from whatever they taught us in catechism or as kids, but I don't know if it was a specific role model. But first of all, let's introduce. We have Chris. He was here on a previous show. We were talking about mental health. This is John, or Bridget,
Bridges.
BRDGS, as he goes on
Bridges, yeah.
social media.
I love
He's
your
part of
guitar
the, he's a
collection there.
gender fuck from the PF Young crew. And
Mm-hmm.
so you could tell a little bit about yourself and your background, Chris, and then maybe lead us on this today because it was based off of something you had written recently that you wanted to do a discussion on.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am as I tell everybody on this thing. I mean, at least in terms of internet stuff, I'm pretty much I'm not into for the most part most of the internet until very recently. I started trying to get back into like being being a little social online or something like that again, trying to get to know people, make some friends stuff. But yeah, I just I guess like in terms of the only thing anybody's known before that I used to be a writer for Cracked.com back I don't know back before they started
The
becoming really
comedy site,
yeah, comedy site back before they became really awful.
really
They
not funny.
got bought and sold like 4 different times, and like all the people that used to work there are all gone, and like it's just not a good site anymore. But it used to be a really I mean I will say that for that site too, for as terms of writing goes, and I did some freelance work for a couple other places, but nothing that was major. But they did back in those days. They actually had fairly high journalistic standards for like for a site that did dick jokes about pop culture things. I mean, we actually had to produce real sources and stuff for those we did. So I mean, it was a cool thing to do back then. But since then, I've kind of like I had to stop doing that because I wasn't really making enough money to support us. So then I've worked in I've done everything I've done some screenwriting in the past. I've always been kind of a writer, creative person. I've done music. Done. I am a independently I was homeschooled, so I'm like very independently minded whenever it comes to learning things. I tend to learn things on my own and to figure a lot of things out for just I don't really have a lot of formal education, a lot of things, but I tend to dip my feet into a lot of like philosophical, sometimes theological type modes of thought and conversations like that. Be it social issues or something more. So I have a lot of I think I have some interesting. I think I have some different perspectives on things than at least ones I don't often hear in the discourse all the time. So hopefully I've got something I can add to the overall conversation in the world.
Okay, well, we'll find out. I'm sure you do. John, you're up in what they call it, Canada.
Yeah,
Somewhere.
I'm from the fallen communist state of Canada
Uh,
here in Toronto. I'm a
Here in Toronto,
singer-songwriter and producer. You can look up my music if people want to.
I didn't know that.
BRDGS Bridges. Uh,
Can you check it out?
yeah, I guess in some ways I'm similar to Chris in that like in the past 5 years or so I've kind of started to engage with the online Sense making space is probably what I would call it. And yeah, and then in the past couple months through the PF Young stuff, I started to do that more publicly. So yeah, I don't know. That's probably enough introduction for me for this discussion, I think. Yeah,
Well,
nice
I'm
to meet
definitely
you.
glad
Nice
you're
to meet you,
here.
by the way, Chris.
Mhm.
And good to see you,
And
Jeff.
if you whatever links you send me, I'll put in the description if you have websites or
Okay,
anything
cool.
you want to promote. And well, let's get into some sense making then around men and
Yeah.
masculinity and role models. It started with an essay you posted on the Discord, Chris, about male role models, and there are no good ones, or what are some good ones?
Or just some. I was trying to like. So this is. I'll just give the basic spiel I did in the thing. It was just that it was actually watching something kind of unrelated, but like it was like a reaction video to another thing where it was one of these Jubilee things, and just like I don't know. It's like I think it's just like the 100th time I probably heard that in recent years about how like there's just no good role models for young men. There's no there's no father figures type thing. There's no good that you hear the toxic masculinity thing all the time, and you don't really hear much about positive masculinity stuff. And so like what are some examples of that, like just in terms of like and I agree with what you said before. I don't know that that men necessarily need that, but at the same time it does seem like there's at least a perception out there. I mean, I don't feel like I necessarily need it. I had my own father was a pretty decent role model in a lot of ways, and there's other men that I think I learned a lot from as I was growing up, in terms of like, what I saw in them as being, as being like, good ideas of masculinity. But I don't feel like I really modeled myself after anybody specific or personally, but then I try to think of like, like, well, who is out there. And I had to come across, and like I said this in the thing is that I actually thought of all the people that talk a lot, which is mostly on the right, people that talk a ton about masculinity and about how there aren't any good role models. I really couldn't think of many of those people as being good role models. I just don't, and it's not. And now I have to, and I want to preface too by saying like my criteria in this were very specific and very kind of like kind of specific to like my specific worldview. And I don't take anything, nothing I'm saying or none of the ideas I'm saying in terms of my definitions for masculinity are definitive, or do I feel like that's the only way it could be or anything like that. I just, it's just the way that it occurred to me in terms of like what I see as like, like so there's a lot of things like I excluded and stuff like that a lot of people probably include, and there's good reasons for both those things. But basically just that, in media when we're talking about, if we're talking about the media space of like either like, online streamers and people like that, or, which is kind of the most relevant media to a lot of young people, I think, nowadays. But even when you get into like movies and television, I stayed away from books and stuff. It's just a much bigger category.
Reads.
Yeah, there's well, and plus there's just so many books. There's books go back to like the beginning of time. So we could pull. You'd never stop like trying to figure out the example. So I just kind of stuck to movies and television. And I mean, I was really surprised whenever I kind of like it, just something I guess I kind of took for granted that there's just not that many examples in media in general of characters or people or real people as being people that I would think would be like, that's what a real, that's where I look at an action or look at here and I'm like, yeah, that's what a real man looks like. That's what a real man does in that situation. I mean, so many times you see like these characters, and a lot of it's just, there's just the tendencies of writing and how in writing, how we try to make characters overly complex sometimes. We tend to overly complicate things as writers, and because I know myself, I've written several screenplays, I've written tons of fiction in other ways, and like I couldn't even think of a single example in my own writing that I thought was like, where I had a character where it was like just a really good, strong like male figure, that wasn't wasn't,
Indiana Jones. We've had him since 1981.
Sure. I mean, Indiana Jones is like I see, like if I feel weird about like putting up examples that are like in those fantasy spaces, because like they often don't feel like fully rounded real people to me. Like Indiana Jones feels very strange to me because it's almost that kind of superhero complex where he's like one person when he's Indiana Jones, he's also Professor Jones, and I feel like that's there's like that in itself is a mentality. I feel like it's maybe kind of a little bit toxic to a young mind, maybe like this idea that you can only be a certain way in a certain kind of environment or costume type of thing. I was trying to find examples of people that are like well-rounded, like real people, like people that you could actually look at and be like, I could be like that,
What'd you come up with?
I mean, ultimately, like, in terms of right wing, the right wing kind of space that like talks about this most, the only person I really have an admiration for is Jordan Peterson. I admire him a lot from in terms of like, I mean, but outside of Twitter. His Twitter is toxic as hell, and everyone knows it. But but everything else about his life that I've been in, when he's someone who's very open about his life, and we've seen him go through a lot of things, and I feel like he really owns up to a lot of his failings and makes like, vocally and talks about it, and talks about how he tries to make himself better, and tries to to put forth really good, he tries to I think he tries to put himself out there as like maybe not a good role model, but he tries to put himself out there as a good example of a person. I think whether he's thinking about that or not, he does, I think. And I looked at most of the other people in the space, man. I don't think most of them are worth a damn when it comes to like as masculinity or something like that goes. But I think there's a lot of people I don't know much. I don't really know enough about or know much about in order to really like to see that that's like to really see them as a real person. Like I mentioned Matt Walsh in the article just because like he's such like this weird like cartoonish lumberjack character. Like I like it. He's got great deadpan. Okay, he's probably one of the funniest in terms of like that's the only reason I ever watch his stuff is because his deadpan is so funny sometimes.
He's one of my favorite entertainers.
Yeah, he's really entertaining. Like people like I remember people on the left were freaking out and like saying he was having a meltdown because like he made this joke about how the Little Mermaid. Yeah, he didn't understand like the backlash about the Little Mermaid being black because his opinion that she should be translucent, and like the people on the left were like, "Oh, he's having like a meltdown." Like, no, he's not. He's making jokes. Like, what the frick is wrong with you people?
Well, they're gonna see that anywhere. I mean, they can watch a cartoon and see it. But let me tell you about the thing about Matt Walsh is I'll read something on social media or Twitter, an article or a tweet, and I'll have all kind of thoughts about it. And then I'll turn on Matt Walsh and he's saying the exact same thing.
Sometimes, yeah.
Having the exact same reaction that I am and articulating it in the exact same way that I articulate it to myself. So I don't know if that's a role model. I don't necessarily think of that as a role model or anything to emulate, but it's definitely some kind of
I agree with him
resonance or alignment or simpatico.
I disagree with him on stuff too, but I agree with him on a lot of stuff. I mean, I think he can be maybe blunt to the point of detriment sometimes, but
I mean, I didn't single Matt Walsh out to follow him or even particularly pay attention to him, but he just happens to be the one that's consistently having the same experience to things on social media that I am.
I see that. Yeah.
John, what are
I have a question. John. If Chris, would you say that there are examples in your mind of strong like feminine archetypes in today's media? And are we just talking about like what time frame are we specifically trying to address here? Is it like in the modern age, in the past 20 years, we've lost a prevalence of positive masculine archetypes in our media, or is it like in the past 100 years, past 1,000 years?
Yeah, because I was thinking,
could you define it a little clearly
Odysseus
or clearer for me, or maybe I'm missing it?
No. That's a really good question. I mean, it's something I did think about a little bit too. I didn't really go into a bunch of the thing that was getting long, and I there's a lot of stuff. I had a lot of thoughts I had. I tend to be very long-winded too, so I'm trying to work on that, trying to be more succinct. And I tend to get very like long-winded and talk about things for way too long, but which I'm doing right now. Anyway, but I don't know, like in terms of like I do think that's probably something that I feel like even whenever I was younger, I was born in the 80s, born in 81. So I mean, I feel like even when I was younger, I do feel like the overall sense of like, well, first of all, the society had not turned against the concept of masculinity so thoroughly about that at that point, right? Whenever I grew up in the 80s, I think sometime around mid 90s or so, it seems like that's whenever I remember first kind of hearing these like people in culture and stuff talking about like how masculinity is bad and chauvinism and this sort of thing, kind of the rise of that kind of that particular wave of feminism kind of came out. And I also about the femininity thing, I do have some thoughts on that, but like I actually found there's a lot more positive role models for women, positive female role models. There were male ones.
Could you give an example?
And I mean, I do have examples. I just have to like think about it for a second.
Yeah, it's okay. Take your time.
I don't because I can't really pull up like I have a document that has a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of notes I wrote on it, but I would have to like click off the screen and everything. So let me see here. I mean, a lot. I mean, just going back, like I think, for example, I thought Little Women, the film adaptation of Little Women, but like both the most recent one and also the one with Winona Ryder from the 90s, both have some really good female archetypes in them. Where at least the main character of Jo, she's very I mean, I actually I thought it was an inspired character even as growing up, like like
Mhm.
of managing a balance between being nurturing and also independent and stuff like that. She just embodies a lot of really positive feminine ideas and traits, and like I think you see that in a lot more. I think that has once again has a lot to do with like that trend that kind of started, like I said, mid 90s or early 90s, maybe even a little bit. We said the sitcom thing, I think it's like was maybe the first situation where every male character in every sitcom was an entirely a buffoon, and like they did everything they did was wrong and chauvinistic, and like like just that whole like the fat lazy like husband type that just like comes in and says the
According
dumb
to
thing.
Jim.
Yeah, Courtney, exactly. Courtney Jim is that's why I was trying to think of the name. I couldn't really.
Yeah.
That is the
That's-
absolute the epitome. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is the highest level of that. And
I guess you could say Homer Simpson too. Maybe
Well,
that's a more
except Homer Simpson's funny though. I guess
well,
that's the main difference. Is that Homer Simpson's
funnier,
funny.
that's for sure.
Funnier, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, at least Simpsons hasn't been funny in a long time, but there was a time. I mean,
No, I agree.
I've never been a huge Simpsons fan, but I think Simpsons was
I haven't
funny.
either.
I think Simpsons was funny at one time. I've definitely seen. I've never understood the obsession with Simpsons. Like it's something that like the people in my generation specifically like are obsessive with it. Like Seinfeld too and Friends, and I don't get any of those. But
You don't like Seinfeld?
I mean,
Oof.
it's fine.
I like what's
I like
his name?
Seinfeld. I don't dislike it. I just
Larry
don't,
David
I
better.
don't.
Curb?
Yeah, I like Curb better. I don't dislike Seinfeld. I just don't get the obsession with it that some people my
Yeah, it was
Right.
okay. It's kind of like a once you get the humor, it's the same
Yeah,
thing every
it's
episode.
the same thing. Yeah. I mean, it's not, but it's not bad by any means. I was always a little bit more into slightly more absurdist stuff, like back when it was on news radio was my favorite at the time.
Okay.
I like news radio better, but I mean that's just from that time period, that those kind of sitcoms. So like, but my favorite shows of all time are pretty much like Community and I think the Good Place was amazing and stuff like that. I mean,
Yeah. Fair enough.
I have a lot of I'm very pop culture centric in my life. I so much of my stuff. It's like like as a writer though. I try to be a screenwriter professionally for a while. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, I think there's, I mean, even myself, I think when I was writing a lot. So I think I ended up writing more positive female characters just because of like, it's like, because I think that was part of like that kind of cultural thing of like, the male characters are always bad kind of thing. I think it worked its way into my own psyche whenever I was writing stuff, that I tend to write the male characters as being like, less than in a lot of ways too. Which is really strange. Like I never consciously thought of it that way, but I just realized that like looking back to my own like, work and stuff like that. And it's just, I think that like, I mean, I was trying to find people characters and stuff that had a good mixture of like flaws and strong traits, like characters that weren't necessarily superheroes or not necessarily like war heroes and stuff like that, just because of in those kind of extreme situations, I feel like it's a lot easier to write and to to show someone being masculine and manly and stuff like that. It seems like those are the contexts in which society kind of says it's okay to be manly. It's like it's okay to be a masculine character whenever you're in war, right? You can be very masculine, you can be macho even. It's okay to be an Arnold Schwarzenegger in those situations. But it comes back to real life, then like it comes to like living with your family or living with your wife and you're taking care of your kids and stuff like that. And that's whenever things get a lot more complicated.
Here's a thought that just came to my mind. If pardon the interruption.
Sure, yeah. No, absolutely. Go ahead.
I'm gonna try and construct in real time. Is like we live in such a period of unprecedented peace.
Yeah.
And we evolved, and the feminine and masculine temperament evolved with us through, I would say 99% of the time being a time of, well, maybe not 99% time, a time of war, but certainly far from the level of peace that we experience in the current age. And so maybe, because I like it jumped out to my attention when you said that it's okay to be masculine when it's a time of war. Yeah. And I think that, well, through probably our evolutionary history, war was so present that you needed people in your society pretty much at all times who were ready to go to war. And we don't really need that. Or I don't think it's the case that we don't need that, but I think it is popular in the zeitgeist for people to believe that we don't necessarily need that now. And so it's not okay to be masculine, because I think it's not unfair to say that masculinity is adapted for war.
To some degree, yeah.
I think that there is more so than femininity.
Well, yeah,
say,
I mean, like
for kinetic war, at least
war,
maybe.
war is the story of all history. I mean, I mean,
But I have a question though. What are we talking about when we say masculinity and okay to be masculine? Does that mean aggressive? Our ability to use violence to protect and defend, and then when you're not in that situation, you don't have this thing called masculinity. What is masculinity? What are we talking about?
I see it more as I see it as masculine. It really has really nothing to do with like the ability to use violence or something like that. It's more the ability to be forceful, I think, to a degree. The ability to stand up for yourself, or stand up, but not just stand up for yourself so much. Stand up for the people you care about. Stand up for things that you believe are right. Things that people that are willing to stand up for things that, whenever something is being done or said or whatever that you feel is truly on a deep level wrong. That's one of the things I said about Jordan Peterson in the article, was like, like he was comfortably an academic. He had a 10-year job at a university that he probably
he's not the most masculine person.
But whenever like the whole title, I can't remember the name of the Canadian like law thing about that he felt was compelled.
Bill C-16.
Yeah, LC. There you go. I couldn't remember the actual name for it.
Is that the pronoun law?
The pronoun law
they were trying to pass. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's what thrust him in the whole public spotlight thing. I mean, like he felt that it was just unacceptable, and even though like he knew, and he's talked about it far on podcasts, he knew that by doing this was going to be going against other academics, and it was going to possibly get him blackballed in his own field, like his own. I mean, he knew he was possibly wrecking his whole life doing that. He stood up for it because he really believed so strongly. And it's just, it frustrates me so much to see like how people call him a fascist all the time. And like, this guy risked everything to stand up against fascism. And so everyone's like fascist. Like, well, that's the best thing they can come up with.
Everything's fascist.
To be fair to their side of the argument, they don't view that as fascism. They don't view Bill C-16. I certainly do, and I assume both of you do.
I do.
But just to avoid
no, I know they don't.
Argument, I want to give the devil its due. It's like, well, from their perspective, the Jedi are evil. From their perspective, that's not fascism, and to oppose that is fascism. So to call him a fascist is logically consistent within their framework.
It's absolutely
but I do agree with you.
Yeah.
Would you say that had Jordan Peterson been Jordina Peterson and acted the same way, or Jordina Peter daughter, and acted the same way, would that be effeminate?
No,
would that be masculine?
I thought about
acting that way.
I thought about this exact question too, and it's kind of weird it's kind of a weird thing to try to answer, but the best way I can come up with is like, I mean, okay, so if it was a woman that was doing the same thing, not to say women can act masculine, women can absolutely act masculine. Yep. Women can act in a masculine way, men can act in a feminine way. Femininity has more to do with nurturing, caring, more about less about like I said, like I feel like masculinity is more about being able to stand up for things, to fight for things you believe in, for an ability to take care of people in a more like outwardly forceful way. Whereas femininity is more about taking, you can stand up for things and things like that, and you can even, a woman could act masculine in that sense, but at the same time, it's also going to be different. If they do it in a feminine way, it's not going to be as forceful. It's going to be like, they'll do it more like organizing. Women are better like organizing protests, or doing these kind of like like more like grassroots kind of like trying to community outreach types of things. I mean, that just tends to be the way women tend to do things in those situations. As opposed to like,
I would just push back on that, and just language wise, I would just say the way I would frame it is not women tend to do this. I would say the more feminine approach.
You're right. That is
because
the best way
as you said, men can act in a feminine way, women can act in a masculine way, and I don't necessarily say that to push back against you. I just
you're right,
especially because this is a public conversation.
Absolutely, I agree. I agree completely.
I do like forceful. I don't think it's a bad thing. And I'm hearing courage too. Courageous.
Yeah, courage. Yeah, courageous. Courageous. I used to use forceful because I was trying to think of like, it's not about violence, but it's about being willing to like.
Because whoever organized the 2020 protest, if that was feminine, they were some of those violent protests I've ever seen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but see, like, it's also cowardly though, because they were all behind masks and everything like that. I think something masculine is willing to stand up with their, was willing to put their self, their name, their face out there. Was willing to, is not going to hide behind like hide behind masks or like or anonymous like people on the internet, stuff like that. I think that's
Come at me.
it's very yeah.
Bring
So,
it.
so somebody who's willing to stand up and say this, and also willing to take the heat they get from that, and is and
So
takes
personal
takes
responsibility too.
exactly, personal responsibility, a big thing, yeah. Which I think I did list it. I wish I could pull up the thing now, but
I have a men's group, and one day we sat together and we kind of brainstormed some masculine values or qualities, and it's very similar to what we're already talking about: freedom of
Right.
expression,
Mm-hmm.
violence, aggression, which you could call forceful, problem solving, personal development, pride in masculinity, pain, and yeah, those are some of the ones that we came
Would you
up
say the
with.
transcendence of pain is a masculine virtue? What do you mean by pain?
I think it's like ability to tolerate or endure pain, or not let
Okay.
pain inhibit action.
yeah, like eliminating kind of stoicism. I think is
Yeah, I
a good
guess
thing,
stoicism. Although I'm not.
Like in my mind, one of the ways
that
that I delineate masculinity from femininity, and I'd be curious your guys' thoughts on this, is like masculinity deals more with confronting the world outside of the group, and femininity deals more with the
Caring for the
cohesion
group.
of the in group.
Yeah, no, that's
That to
it.
me,
That's it.
because
That's
there's
it.
so many things in those two worlds that similar strategies, being courageous. Well, you can kind of be courageous in both of those endeavors.
Absolutely,
But to be courageous in engaging in the outside world outside of your group, and to be courageous in group conflict or do like endeavors to strengthen the in group. That to me has been a helpful way. I wonder what you guys think about that.
I do
in
see
terms of delineating
men
those two.
also focused on like providing structure and cohesion for the in group. So I do think they also have this internal focus or role to play in keeping a group together internally as well. I see what you're saying. I don't disagree with it. I would just.
Can you say more about that?
Well, you said men facing external and the courage directed outward.
I said the masculine, but
Yeah,
Yeah,
masculine.
Sorry,
it's gonna get
I'm
confused.
annoying to talk to.
The
No,
men.
I think being precise.
But I also think they play a role in the in group, in the internal or was it centripetal direction as well,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of providing structure, order, keeping the group. And women play more of the nurturing, connecting, or feminine plays more of the nurturing, connecting role in the in group. But they also maybe have an outer role as well in intergroup or intertribal relationships. So I don't know if it's strictly like an external focus, internal focus dichotomy. I think the masculine does have strengths that are focused internally as well as externally, and same for the feminine.
The one thing I would add to that, because I think, and these are very rough ideas, these are not refined in my mind at least, that so much of what the masculine effort of in-group stability is directed in terms of competition with other groups. That's the way I don't know if I phrased that exactly right. Whereas I feel like the structure that is imposed might not be the right word, but the structure that exists from the masculine energy in terms of an in-group exists functionally in order to compete with other groups or to compete with the outside world. Whereas I feel like, to me, there is a distinct difference in the efforts, the feminine efforts within an in-group, because that to me feels more just like the goal is the cohesion of the in-group. Whereas with the masculine energy, the goal is to compete with other groups.
Sure.
Does that kind of
I know
make sense?
so many competitive women and competitive femininity. I associate competition
agree.
almost more
Yeah.
with femininity than I do with masculinity outside of sports or athletics.
I mean, I see what you mean, but at the same time, I know, like, I mean, I'm not a super competitive person most of the time, but so they get in certain situations, like, man, like that part of it comes out. Like, I took a bartending class once, and very quietly and subtly over the course of the 6 weeks I did that course, I started out not really, but by the end of it, I was going to be the top of that class, and I was, but I was the only person like aced the test and everything like that. I get very quietly competitive, I find boisterousness and like the big loud, like, that kind of thing that people associate with like the toxic masculinity thing of the whole guy, the loud guys. It's like, I think that kind of competitiveness too, I find obnoxious and possibly toxic to some degree, but at the same time, I don't. But I think just literally to me, it just feels poisonous. Just like being around that, I guess, hate being around guys like that. but like I think that there is. No, I think what you're saying is right, though. I mean, at least that's certainly an aspect of it about the external and the internal. I think that's I think you got a really good point there.
Yeah, I kind of see what you're saying too. I think the categories they get so fuzzy after a certain point and almost start to turn into each other. So it's really hard to pinpoint.
There's a lot of crossover, I think.
Yeah. What exactly is the masculine role?
What we're interested is the outside of the Venn diagram, and I think that's worth.
Yes.
So I don't know. I feel like I kind of put us a little bit off the rails.
No, I don't think you did at all. I think you might have put us more in a better direction to start.
One example I wanted to bring up that I actually just thought of. I had made a small list before the stream, but during this, I was like, well, Uncle Phil from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, it's pre-1990s, but
not bad to me. Didn't think about that one. Yeah.
To me, that's like I haven't watched a ton of that, and it's kind of vague in my memory. I'm mostly just going off that one clip that everyone still shares, the "Why Doesn't He Want Me" clip. But that's like a really strong masculine archetype, isn't it?
I mean, pretty good actually. I didn't really thought about that. I didn't really think too much about sitcoms because of the fact that so many sitcom. I mean, just in general, just sitcom characters. Period. Be it on the women or the men's side, they tend to. Well, they're all clowns, kind of. They're all jokes, and so like there's very few times where you really get to see them like in a way that you couldn't. They just so come across goofy or oafish in some way. But that's actually a good one. That's not one I had not considered. That actually is a. I mean, I guess you could say that Bill Cosby, but of course he's going to ruin that now. He ruined that for
that was the other example. Yeah, but
I was thinking of him
at the time. His character was, and I guess you couldn't, I don't know, you could say that even now that character still exemplifies.
No, you could. I just
masculinity.
Honestly, it doesn't. I have no problem separating people's actions from things they've done, but I just in society, it's just like you can't throw like, oh, Bill Cosby was a good.
Yeah, like John Lennon. John Lennon's a good example, like separating the artist from the art. Like he's a. Anyway, sorry, I was going to make a comedy joke.
He was a terrible person.
I was going to go the opposite direction. I was going to say, I mean, Imagine is a piece of commie bullshit, but he was a pretty good guy. That's what I was going to say.
I did. His relationship with he had some things,
which is obviously a joke. Fuck that guy. But
he definitely. Well, I mean, there's good sides and bad. He was one of the most brilliant songwriters of all time. I can't like.
Yeah. No, that's facts.
People like say it's Paul and John, but I think John was the bigger part of that relationship, if you ask me. But yeah, Imagine.
I'm on the opposite side of you on that, but that's
really think. Well, it's just that
yesterday, dude. Yesterday.
Yesterday's great, I guess.
That's me.
What, you're Paul McCartney?
Overplayed to me, but
Paul over John.
I'm Paul over John.
But then Paul did Wings though, and I just like
No, that's Wings is some of the best music of the set. Like that's one of the best pop groups.
Band on the Run makes me cringe so hard. I don't know. I'm just like,
I like them almost better than the Beatles.
Wings. I mean, they're not that bad, but yeah, I like the Beatles better. Sorry, I gotta say,
Venus and Mars.
Pretty much, White Album and Revolver are like two of my favorite albums of all time, though. So I don't know. I'm pretty biased on that, but I mean,
but that's a good rock and roll is a good point because that's mostly where my role models come from.
I like Pet Sounds better than both of them.
Rock. You like Pet Sounds?
I like Pet Sounds better than both those Beatles albums. But...
Oh, I've tried to get into it. It's a little too white for me, like too white middle class. I can't. Hey, it's missing something.
I just that's the only Beach Boys album you'll ever hear me praise, except
me too.
Just that, and then Brian Wilson's like solo work that he did after that. But I mean,
is there an example in the world of rock and roll of someone you'd call a masculine archetype?
Lou Reed was mine
because I know so
and
little about
some of the indie bands, but Lou Reed for sure is like my core role.
I don't know much about.
But then so is Mick Jagger and the Rugs. Well, he was bisexual. He was probably neurodivergent. He was very drugs, rock and roll, BDSM. So like all my intersections show up in him, and he was very blunt, not afraid to express himself. If you watch any interviews with Lou Reed, he's very difficult to interview because he doesn't kind of play along with the interview or play the game. He just expresses what's on his mind.
Love that.
And he doesn't care who he offends. And then Laurie Anderson is like one of my favorite. I think she is the greatest 20th century artist of our time, and that was his wife.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
But then a lot of the alternative rock, Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth was my like teen idol growing up. If I had a poster over my bed, it would be Thurston Moore, and he's total lefty. He's completely woke. Sonic Youth is woke. All my indie bands are woke.
Of
But
course.
musically, that's who I connect with the most.
yeah.
Back then, intellectually as well. So I think for me, it was more about intellectual role models than it was social role
No, I
models.
agree. I mean, and that's the same. That's the same thing for me. But honestly, like it's like that was whatever the question got my question came to mind. I said like that's why it was so kind of jarring to me to realize like I just couldn't really think of anybody because like I didn't really see that. But I feel like I feel like you and me and probably all three of us here of this in this stream are kind of like we're kind of outside probably the mainstream like the general. I was trying to imagine like my kind of criteria was like if I have like a 5-year-old boy, if it's like my 5-year-old son, and for some reason, for whatever reason, like for some reason, there's an opportunity where like I have to like show him an example of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about masculinity or something like that, something that's not myself.
Other than yourself.
Yeah, other than myself. I mean, obviously, you want as a father, you'd want to be. It's like this. It's not a real world situation. It's like a very nebulous kind of like ethereal kind of idea of just like that. If you had to, for whatever reason, you had to like put someone up as a public figure or character as something like this is what this is the kind of person you should want to be like, that kind of thing. And like that was kind of like my criteria and trying to figure out what and once I had like a couple of examples in mind, and I went through and like, what are those things that I admire so much about those people, and why would I put that up? And I don't even know. I mean, it may be entirely. I think the more interesting conversation we're getting into is more like the specifics of what masculinity is more than the example thing, really, because I tend to find that more interesting. But I realize that too, in a lot of ways, maybe that might be a silly kind of proposition for a lot of people because I don't know that it really matters that much. But I just thought it was really weird because I could kind of immediately think of a lot more female examples than I could male examples. I just thought it was in like so I just kept hearing this thing, but there's no good male roles, no good male role models, blah blah blah. And like I think there's a lot of characters from the past and like from other movies that I didn't include in the list that I thought about, but like I just know that they've been so tainted by this and that over time that like people wouldn't like. Because I almost put like I don't like this movie at all, but Rhett Butler from Gone with the Wind is actually a very good example. But people associate that movie so much slavery and racism and everything like that. It was just like, even though the character isn't a part of that necessarily, just the fact that it's a part of like that cultural thing, it just seems like, well, it's kind of a moot point. People wouldn't accept. I'm just trying to think. It was a thought experiment, just a thought experiment trying to figure out like if I could think of something. Like I did come up with like I did put the main two film examples I came up with was Jerry Maguire actually, which I think is
I don't know that one.
I rewatched it.
That was a good movie.
I rewatched
Except
it.
it had Tom Cruise in it.
Yeah, Tom Cruise.
Okay.
I mean, Tom Cruise, but I mean, he's amazing in that movie. And like, I don't.
Tom Cruise has some great movies.
Yep.
And the only thing I don't like it is Tom Cruise.
Yeah, I don't like it as a person at all. But as an actor, it's the character of Jerry Maguire, the way it's written, the kind of character that his thing is. I mean, his whole character. It starts out like he's a very rich, a successful like sports agent, and he's very very wealthy and successful. And he just like has a crisis of conscience. He has a moral like awakening where he realizes that what he's doing is what their whole business model is just wrong. And he runs like a book. He writes like a small like pamphlet type thing, like this thing of like the things that he thinks are wrong, and like this like he hands it out to everybody, and everybody acts like they're all happy about it, and they fire him like a week later because it's just like you can't say this kind of thing. He stands up for what he believes in, tries to make things better, and he suffers consequences for it, and that leads to all of this whole thing, and then leads to like the way he ends up in a relationship with this woman and that used to work for him and stuff like that, and she has a young son that and he tries his best to like be like a father figure to like this boy and stuff like that. And just everything about that movie, I mean, really like the character itself is a really good example of someone in a modern kind of sense of like a modern day, like a sense that you look at that, you can see that as a person that could exist in real life, real everyday life. I mean, even though being kind of rich and successful, but he also falls really low in that. He loses a lot. He loses a lot of his material stuff just because he had a crisis of conscience and started stand up for it. But he doesn't, and also at the same time, he doesn't like whine about it or he has some freakouts. He definitely has some moments of like doubt, like why did I do this? But at the same time, he stands firm in that and still tries. And he's someone also that another big thing I think it's a really important, and not that women can't be this too, but it's different when a woman is passionate versus a man. And passion is a big thing. I think that is a very masculine trait.
Another one.
I mean, someone who's truly passionate about not just not just what they believe in, but what they enjoy doing. Like if they're passionate about their vocational role, in the world, like if you're in arts and you're a writer or a musician or something like that, someone who really believes in that thing, that they do. And this is a character like I'm not a sports person, okay? I don't watch sports. I've never really get into it. I don't find sports interesting to me at all. But so if a movie can get me to care about someone who believes so strongly that there's a passion for being a sports agent, which is something I could never care about in a million years, like that really, like, that shows like a real, like, that there's something like that's really compelling about that as a character, that you can kind of latch on to that. You can really, I don't identify with wanting to be a sports agent, but I identify with believing in doing that thing enough, that having a passion for a task, a thing that I'm good at. I believe in that a lot, and I see that as something like, and I see that it's really, that is really lacking in a lot of our when we do see public male figures. We don't see a lot of people that love what they do, or seem to, like, have a good attitude about what they do, or anything like that. Even, like, it's very rare to see that in, I think, our society anymore. That's something that personally I would just love it if there would be more movies, more TV shows about characters in general that do something they love, and it shows them doing it and loving doing it. I find that to be one of the most compelling things on screen. There's a show from an example I tried to put in the list that I meant to put in there, was actually a show that used to be on TV like years and years back, called Sports Night. Another weird sports related thing. I don't know why this is those two, but there's still called Sports Night about people that are really passionate about making but especially about Sports Center, right? It's about like a behind the scenes Sports Center show. It's a sitcom, right, but not like a real jokey sitcom, more like a very, like, fast talking kind of, like, I don't know. It's a guy that what's his name? Aaron Sorkin. He also made that show, The Newsroom, and stuff like that. And which wasn't a great show, but Sports Night's really great. There's a character in there, not that any of the main characters. William H. Macy plays a side character in one episode, or like a string of episodes. And, like, there's a scene in that I'd like to go and see if I can find a clip of that. I should like post that in Discord or something like that, because it's such a great example of, like, someone of a character that just, like, stands up for something and does not give a fuck what happens to them. Just because, like, they know what they're doing is right, and the consequences be damned. I'm going to stand up for this. I'm going to put this in your face, and, like, and people tend to respect that a lot of times whenever you do. And I think that's something I think maybe we don't need role models like that in media and society, but at the same time, I kind of feel like it probably couldn't hurt.
It sounds like we're talking about heroes and the hero archetype. And
I don't like the masculine word, to be honest with you. I don't like the word role models.
Well, yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Hero's good.
Yeah, I prefer the hero thing.
Sure. Yeah. I say use role models. I was thinking of it.
There's being your own hero too, and I think it's flawed. Like, when I think about it, all of my Satan is my hero. He's my role model, but my heroes are very flawed. They're heroes or hero. Even Lou Reed, he was an addict. I think he had some domestic violence history, and one of my favorite movies is True Detective, and the two detectives, it was Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson.
That's one of my favorites too.
Good show. Yeah, good show.
Best show.
But they're the heroes. They are the ones that defeats the evil at the end, and they are the ones that the community relies on to slay the dragon. But they are not men you would want any of your kids looking up to and saying, be like them, except for the qualities that we do admire in them. So I think heroism is very complex, especially in the modern age.
It definitely is complex. I mean, that was kind of the thought experiment. Of the challenge of it was trying to find ones that actually I could point to in that way. And like I say, maybe that's not necessary, but I don't know that it would be hurtful. But I just like that was the goal. That was the goal of my little project. That was the thing. It was like just like trying to find some that were grounded enough and realistic enough that I feel like you could relate to them and relate to them in a way that you could actually emulate it if you felt like that was something you needed to do. But also that and also that they should have, you should be able to see how they overcome problems, how they deal with tragedy. I mean, so there's a lot of criteria that makes it very difficult, because like there's a lot of people that could be very good masculine role models, but you don't know very much about them. And there's a lot of people you just don't know much about. You don't know what they're like. I mean, and then when you find out about their real lives, it's usually not good. Like, for example, he was never someone I would consider this way anyway. Steven Crowder was recent, like thing like that, like you find out like some of their actual personal life, what they're actually like in real life, and it's like, wow, it's even worse than I thought it would be. A lot of times you don't find out positive things in those senses for a lot of it. When you find like you get the person or the character at home, it's like they're all heroic here, but they're beating their wife or something, and it's like there's a lot of like things like that. So I was trying to find of ideals. It was about the whole idea of projects
Well, I like
identifying
that you
ideals.
bring up that word because that's kind of one of the things that really jumps to mind in this topic of discussion. Is one of my favorite Jordan Peterson quotes is I don't know if it's his original quote, maybe it's Jung or something, but every ideal is a judge. And that to me is something I think about just about every day because I look around in the current society and especially in like the circle that I live in, which is the music industry in Toronto, which is like it's pretty different than the PF Jung Discord, let me tell
Yeah.
you. And there's
Yeah.
such an aversion to the idea of judgment. And it's something that I really puzzle over why everyone or not everyone, but so many people that I interact with are just, they feel that a wrong is being done unto them anytime that they are judged. And to me, the first thing my mind goes to is, well, if you're afraid of being judged, you have to destroy your ideal because
Yep.
the existence of an ideal, like what Jordan Peterson said, a judge at every moment, every waking moment of your life, you're being judged by that perception of the ideal. So it makes sense to me that there's vanishingly few masculine archetypes, strong masculine archetypes, but I would also say that there are vanishingly few strong, actually positive feminine archetypes in media today. And that gets talked about less. And I'm not sure if that's more or less of a problem, but that to me is probably about the same level of a problem because if we don't have some sort of intimation of the ideal for both masculine and feminine archetypes, people will be lost. People will not bring about the best possible version of themselves because they will not feel that judgment from the ideal. And
that's really good. That's really good. Yeah.
So that was one of the things I thought of when I read your thing. Is like, well, I absolutely feel that for men and for people who look for masculine role models or heroes. But I think that it is also a huge problem for females and for people who look for feminine heroes. It's vanishingly few, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that people are fearful of being judged, and so in order
everybody judges.
Well, I think that yes, I agree with you there, but there is like this aversion to being judged as if it is some moral wrong. That's just immaturity.
That's just like emotional immaturity, psychological immaturity. And when
totally,
I think of ideals, like judgment is evaluating, and I think of values as well. And to me, all of that is internal. Like hero worship and heroism or finding role models is just a tool to help you determine or clarify your own values for yourself, which ultimately are internal. And your ideal is an internal ideal that you discover from yourself. And so my heroes and role models change throughout my life as my values change or reprioritized. And so I think that the external is just like the first step on a path that's ultimately internal or intrapersonal. And it's the development of authentic values, your authentic ideal, your authentic vision for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, there's no,
individuation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, there's really isn't. I don't think there's any higher ideal in mass, or like I said, in personhood in general, but like especially in masculinity, I feel like being your own. The whole idea of like a man is an island kind of thing. No, I don't mean like that, but I mean like in the sense of being your own person, just developing as a person unto yourself. Just like we were talking in the chat earlier about, I was harping on that a lot. Just like I'm just so sick of everybody of this whole identity thing. Just like people should identify as themselves. You should identify as who you are, whoever you are, whatever your name is. Identifying yourself, boxing yourself into some category is just stupid. And then making that your whole thing. Your whole thing is that, well, that's who I am. I'm an LGBT, whatever, or I'm a brony. I'm a furry, or I am.
Individualism is stigmatized now as white supremacy. So it's almost this.
According to the Smithsonian.
Yeah, it really is. It's insane. I mean, like, it's like, isn't that? I mean, because that kind of thinking is what frees you from things like racism and fascism.
That's why I think this is regressivism.
Because my whole life I've always been like that, and like I've been friends with people of every color, every sexual orientation, things like that. And just growing up, we just didn't talk about that stuff. It was immaterial to the fact that I was friends with them, that they were black, or that I was white, or that they were gay, or like, or whatever. Yeah. It didn't matter. I mean, that just wasn't. I mean, a lot of times I didn't even know that like the person was gay. I mean, if they're black, but I didn't know that person was gay for like a long time, because it wasn't I mean, it didn't come up because like their sexual
Yeah.
activity just wasn't important to our friendship, you know. Because you know, if you're not trying to date or fuck somebody, then I don't really see why how it has much to do with anything. But everybody's also obsessed with that. And I think that's a lot of the that I think that is like maybe that is the, as people said, the feminization. People use that term, the feminization of society and stuff like that. And because like it seems like women do tend to like be more group oriented in that sense, more about identifying with groups. That I think that femininity tends to identify more in group senses, and masculinity tends to more identify more in an individualistic sense. And I don't know why that is exactly, but I mean, there just seemed to be something to
I think
it.
I would agree with that as a general characterization. Yep.
I mean, which is
I don't know why that would be the case,
I don't either.
but that feels right.
Well, I think it's more with women. Women are naturally more. Well, first of all, like from day one, women are from. I have a daughter. I have two daughters, and like I mean, they are absolutely. And I have a nephew who's a little boy that's a nephew, and from day one, from the time they're babies till going on with their lives, their boys are just more interested in toys and things, and when girls are more interested in faces. A little girl will sit and just stare at you. Just stare at your face and just like laugh and giggle, and like you don't have to do anything, just like pay attention to them, and they'll be entertained by that. That's right. That's what I mean. Like I mean, and I've seen this. I have three sisters, and I have we have a couple boys in our family too, and I have seen it in real life. I mean, this isn't something that we socialize into them. I'm talking about pretty much from like the first day they start noticing things in general, noticing the world around them. They're like girls are more interested in faces, and like the boys are more interested in sort of people and things. And so this like speaks to the fact that femininity is more centered around, like I said, nurturing, being taking care of people, you know, in a more like you know, like that's the reason why these archetypes exist. I mean, they don't come from nowhere. I don't think that women should only clean and only cook and stuff like that. But I mean, that's the reason why they've tended more towards that sort of thing. Why women tend more towards being teachers, women and men tend to be more construction workers, things like that. Not just the physical like limitations, but just women just usually aren't interested in those things because they're not usually interested in building things or I mean, and that's nothing wrong with that. And that's the thing. That's what I think what's gotten so twisted is that people have got this idea that there's something wrong with it if women aren't interested in those things. And like,
it is morally good to participate in the money economy, and it is morally bad to do anything else. That's the modern ethos.
Yeah, I mean, and that could be an actual ill of capitalism, maybe, but I don't know. I mean, because I tend to be a capitalist myself, but at the same time, I guess that it could be maybe an evil that has come out of it, like this obsession with everyone participating in the economy type thing. But of course, that doesn't really make sense either, because like for capitalism to exist, you need the nurturing people to actually produce well,
that's why I specifically call it the money economy, because to me there's so many economies. Yeah. And women participate we all participate essentially in all of them. But historically, the money economy, or the resource economy, maybe you'd call it, maybe, but I think money economy is probably better.
Yeah, I think it's better.
Has been the domain of men. And I'm not saying I'm going to invoke David Hume for a second. I'm not saying that should be, but I'm also not saying that it shouldn't, because the other economies matter a lot too. And maybe if we put this, huge priority on the money economy at the expense of the other ones, we will see our society fall. Well, that is entirely possible, in my opinion. And
what are some of the other ones?
I would say like the probably
family economy, maybe.
Yeah, like the family economy, the community building economy, I
like that one.
Yeah. Actually, I haven't really thought about it enough to have some really good.
Money and community are pretty much two good, just like basic.
I think those are two good ones.
Basic dualistic structure there. I mean, like
any place where human energy is expended in the direction of some form of good, I would probably call an economy. And so I think that the money economy is definitely an important one of those, but that's something I should do more thinking about, because I'd like to have kind of more of a list. But those are two good ones, I think. The money economy and the community economy.
The whole caveman archetype of like the males, the hunter gatherers, the people that actually went out and got the food and brought it back, whereas the women like cooked the food type of thing, like that whole like
that all needed to be done.
Exactly. Both those things they both
one was not more important than the other.
And it makes sense whenever you think, okay, so women are also the ones that can have children, and therefore it makes a lot of sense.
The childbearing economy, there's one.
Yeah. Which
I'm not joking. That's an economy. That's expensive.
You can put that under community building as well, though. I mean, like that's the community side of it. Like
I would say that would maybe be a subset, but it's a particular subset because it is only accessible to half the population.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's the distinction. Men can certainly be caretakers. I mean, I do a lot of caretaking of my daughter and stuff like that. But I mean, at the same time, it's and like I've never had any shame about. I think that's another big thing too that I think like it's doing the things that are right. Masculinity is another thing about masculinity. It's not just about doing things that are right, but doing them and not having any shame about it. Like doing things just in general that just in your day-to-day life, whenever you're just, there's everything you do. Like there's so many things that men get so like squeamish and just dumbly squeamish about. Like, like I for example, like when I go out, I don't just take a wallet. I have this bag here that I carry with me everywhere. I carry this bag with me. People have made comments that like, oh, you have a man purse kind of thing. Like I just said, I don't give a fuck. I mean, it doesn't matter to me. Like it's more, it makes more sense to me. Like the jeans and stuff I wear and the bad that I am misplace my wallet. It makes more sense for me to carry a bag, like put my wallet in and I know where it is. And like, also, I don't like having bulky keys in my pocket. I just don't, so I have a bag that I carry my it's a masculine looking bag, I think.
Remind me to send you the song I made recently called Fanny Pack. I think you'll like it, but continue.
Okay.
It's a banger.
I've never worn a fanny pack though, I will say.
It's close enough.
Well, yeah, that's integrity, like self-consistency and
just
consonancy with your values.
Being the person that you are, being comfortable with that, and like I think, which this speaks to like just the old chestnut about what do women look for? They look for confidence, confidence and humor, or whatever. But but confidence is always the thing that you hear the most. Like women are always saying, I mean, hell, I heard that a lot whenever I was a teenager. I was still trying to meet girls and stuff like that. Whenever it's like if I ever got rejected, it was usually like you're just not very confident, kind of thing. I heard that a lot, I understand, and I didn't understand it then, but as I get older, I started to understand like what that meant. It's not just about just doing about being confident, like this kind of like this idea that we have of confidence, just like being, constantly right about everything, but it's about like doing being who you are and being who you are without any kind of apology or shame about it. And there's a sense in
shame seems like the main thing to me in what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like there's
unashamed.
There's this real big sense of like that if you're a man and you do any of these certain things that you have to be ashamed of them, but also these things that were always that didn't used to be considered, you weren't shamed for being a man. Now you're ashamed of those too. So you're ashamed for both sides of it. If you do these certain things, then look at the way like the left has been talking about this shit for. I mean, since like late 90s, like this constant barrage of things about things that are that men aren't open enough. They're not in touch with their feelings. They're not in touch with their feminine side, and all that stuff. And then you see a man like Jordan Peterson who
example.
Who cries because of how much he cares about something, because of how passionate he is about something. And what do? They mock it. They mock him for being a crybaby, and oh man, it triggers me so hard.
Me too.
Nothing triggers me harder than hypocrisy. Like hypocrisy of that degree just makes me like rage. It's like here's someone who's embodying the ideals that like your response is like to call them the exact like opposite of it's just like
what a bitch.
There's an interview that Jordan Peterson gave one time where he talks about like people having a more masculine or feminine psychology, and he says he definitely has more of the feminine psychology.
Yeah, no, he definitely does. He definitely does. But at the same time, I think he's a very masculine person in the sense of like he embodies a lot of the ideals I see as positive masculinity. I just think there's a lot of things that. I mean, it's like I said, the whole list was like it was kind of hyper specific, and the criteria is very hard to read, very hard to hit. But I think that one aspect though, like I think that one, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I feel like the being able to be yourself with a lack of shame, like that's got to be one of the biggest things. Just to be yourself and to stand up for who you are.
I don't really struggle with shame. Are men vulnerable to shame? Or
these days they seem to be. I mean, it sure seems that way.
The masculine archetype is not vulnerable to shame. I would say, like, to bring up one thing you mentioned in your article, you mentioned how like the Tim Pool crew doesn't really exemplify masculinity to you. Yeah. I would agree in almost every case. One thing I really liked, I'm guessing both of you saw the interview they did with Lance from the Surfs. Did you see that?
Oh, that was good. That was good. I mean,
what a wall cow. Yeah, one of the things I love that Tim said, and he said it explicitly, was when Lance said his thing about it's kind of weird to be obsessing about the genitals of a stranger, right?
Was the genital pleasure. He used that term so many times.
It's like so straight cringy. Up, fuck that guy. But one of the things that Tim said, he said, "Look, dude, you can't shame me." And I was like, that is based, and that is masculine archetype shit.
I actually, I'll give you that. Absolutely. No,
and that to me really stuck out, and I loved that. And I find Tim. I won't go off on a tangent about Tim. I have my problems. But I really admire him for some things, and that was one of the things that really jumped out to me. And I think in the sphere of this topic, that is one of, I think, the important things that you want to see in your masculine archetypes that we're probably not seeing a lot these days, is that invulnerability to social shaming.
I think just a healthy emotional intelligence in general, and that's emotional manipulation when they're trying to use shame or guilt or whatever. That's totally a form of emotional manipulation. If you have enough emotional awareness and you're grounded in your own emotions in a positive way, you're going to be less vulnerable to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, society is definitely, I mean, I think in media in general and overall, just the overall tenor of like conversation about just the fact that toxic masculinity is the only time you ever hear the term masculinity, period, pretty much in most media.
There's no masculinity is not toxic.
I agree. Well,
it's like toxic vitamin C. It's like,
there's
too much. You can go way too far, like you can with femininity or vitamin C or masculinity. It's like, but
I mean, there can be.
It's silly.
There's definitely toxic femininity.
I don't even know what toxic means. Someone said define as a negative effect on the mental state of those around you, which is so vague. Like, just if whatever you're trying to communicate, find another way to say it. Toxic is not conveying anything to me.
I can understand that. I guess, and I just use it just as the term that has just become so accepted in societies. But
it's a buzzword.
I didn't fall back on those just because people understand what you mean by them generally, but. At the same time, you're right. But a more precise term would be better. I'm not really sure.
Maybe
what it would be.
I'm not sure. I agree with Jeff there, but
I mean, I'm just saying I don't know what it means. It doesn't carry meaning for me. It either means everything to everybody, like 100 different things, or it means something intangible that people are intuiting somehow that I don't have the intuition for.
I think of the same about like someone exhibiting a toxic pheromone, or someone you're in a room and like there's like it's like a bad smell in the air. Whenever you're in like a room, if you've ever been in a room, trapped in a room with a bunch of dude bros that just like won't stop talking.
I like dude bros.
Well,
they don't bother.
Like when they want just ones that won't stop like trying to one up people and everything.
Well, this is what guys do.
Like, I sure agree, but like I mean, there's a point where it just gets like it gets
like the gorilla brains.
Yeah, there's just gorilla brains.
There's a point thing. Yeah, at which
I would call
it toxic at a certain point.
But how does that relate to masculinity? What you described?
Just because those are
how is it tied into masculinity? What is it about masculine? Like there's specific behaviors, like being aggressive or smacking people around. But how does that tie into this general category called masculinity? So
one of the problems is that I would say you've heard me talk about gender before, right, Jeff? And maybe Chris has, where I don't like. I think the word gender.
I watched the podcast. Yeah,
we should stop using the word gender because it means something different to everyone who uses it. So it's useless as a word. I would say the same thing about toxic masculinity, but the problem is similar to gender, in my opinion, is that it would be a useful word if we could all agree on a meaning for it. And I think toxic masculinity, if we could all, because it means something different to absolutely everyone, and getting it. And it gets used and abused, and I mean that very intentionally. It gets abused to manipulate people and to win conversations unfairly, and that I really don't like. And so I think if we stop using the word toxic masculinity, it'd probably be a net positive. However, the concept to me is not without its utility, because if we're going to consider aggression writ large as more of a masculine behavior, which I think is probably fair to say.
Forcefulness, which turns
not having control over your level of aggression. I would say, well, maybe that's too much masculinity. That is the point at which it becomes.
So it's not the aggression; it's the lack of control over the aggression. I don't think that's all men. I don't necessarily tie that into masculinity. When I think of masculinity, I don't think of people that can't control their aggression. I think some men may not be able to.
It tends to. I think I guess, and like I don't know, when I was growing up, I certainly had a lot of male friends that were. I definitely wouldn't have said anything that was toxically masculine about them, but except for there would always be I always become really good friends with the guy or something like that, and almost like it'd be like my brother, and then I always find out. But then one time that I was really good friends with this guy that he started dating this woman though, and I started seeing, but that's the way he treated his girlfriend, and I have to say it was kind of shocking to me to see how like kind of awful he was towards his girlfriend. Like suddenly, and it's just a very strange. Like he was such a great guy because but some guys just have like these really skewed like kind of. It's not toxic. I'm trying to think of another word, but like some they have these really skewed ideas about women and about the way you treat women and stuff like that. They're just like that. I mean, aren't masculine, aren't manly. They're just kind of like they kind of come across as pathetic and just kind of constantly trying to swipes at somebody.
Is that tied into his masculinity? That's where I'm having the issue because if we're gonna talk about individuality and judging people like you. I know you as Chris. I know you as John. I know you as a proper noun, not a concrete noun, not a group identity.
Absolutely.
But then we turn around and we fold these behaviors into, instead of it being an individual behavior about Frank, it becomes something about this group identity called masculinity. So we're not even being consistent with our own principles.
I don't think of masculinity as being group identity at all, though. I think it's a trait. It's an innate and very important trait of a person. I don't see it as an identity thing at all. I don't identify as masculine, and
I don't identify as aggressive.
I try
because everything people say about toxic masculinity, I can find women that do the same thing.
But
that's why I see it as an individual.
But I think it's more common. I think I find this stuff tricky to delineate, but
because there is so much crossover. Yeah.
I would imagine it exists way more in men than it does in women, and that's probably one of the good markers to say whether a behavior is masculine or feminine is whether it is disproportionately represented in men as opposed to women. That's probably one way of framing it.
If it's a negative trait or negative behavior that's more predominant in males, then it gets called masculine. Or
maybe
toxically masculine.
If it's a negative, maybe that's one way to put it.
Because even I don't think aggression is negative. I think
it's not.
No, but untrammeled aggression is.
But failure to control aggression.
Well, that's what I mean, though.
But unless it ends in like hitting something or hitting a person, which is violence.
How many times have you seen a girl drunk at a party punch through a wall? Zero.
But that I consider that violence. I don't even consider that it crosses the line at that point into violence. So if we're talking about violence, it's so much easier to just say violence in men, or violence is disproportionately.
No, because there's appropriate violence and there's inappropriate violence.
Calling it something like toxic masculinity, which completely clouds the act.
If anybody can hear me, I kind of froze for a second. I don't know what's.
No, I think we lost Jeff.
Oh, we lost Jeff. Okay, I hear you. Okay, okay. I thought it was me that froze up.
I'm pulling a Paul. I think it's on my end.
You froze for a second.
I'm unstable. I just got the notice.
Okay, no big deal. I thought it was me. I thought it was my thing. Well, no.
Can I make?
It's toxic masculinity just a way of circling around violence without directly addressing the issue of violence.
I don't think so, but maybe. But like, can we approach it from what would you say that there's such thing as like toxic femininity?
Yes, I would absolutely.
Because I would.
Yeah.
I don't want to use the word toxic, but with all my negative experience with women, it's very tempting. But I want to be consistent. If I'm going to defend toxic masculinity, I don't want to turn around and say there's a toxic femininity.
But I think I think it might be a useful way for us to approach it and come to some sort of heightened understanding for all of us, because there are patterns of behavior that are more common in females than in men, I would say, and I would characterize them as feminine, because if we're using the definition that a pattern of behavior that is more common with one sex than the other, we'll call that feminine versus masculine.
And if it has a negative effect.
If it's a negative one, if it's a positive one, we'll call that positive femininity, or maybe we just call it femininity. I don't know. But if it's a positive thing, call it femininity. If it's a negative thing, maybe we call that toxic femininity. And you could then say,
why not negative?
How about sort of say negative, or how about regressive even? Regressive, that might
unhelpful. Sure, like to me, if it's just a matter of which word you'd prefer to use, because to me, toxic doesn't carry an emotional load.
And these are subjectivity. What's positive or negative is a subjective.
Well, it's all values. It's all structures of value, Jeff.
But yes, you can have behaviors that are more associated with males that are more perceived as more positive or experienced more positively than others, which would be negative, and the same with fem. So we have the grid with the quadrants.
It's just the knob getting turned up too high, though. It's just the volume being too high on that thing, because forcefulness can turn into violence, but so can like just being attracted to women can turn into misogyny too. I mean, it's like that's all I meant by it. No, go ahead though.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
That's true.
Yeah, so maybe, and when I originally was talking about toxic masculinity, I think the way that I framed it maybe was not great, because I said like maybe it's pushing it too far, but I don't think that that's the right way to think about it, because it's not just when certain aspects of, say, positive masculinity go past the tipping point. There are also just patterns of behavior that men exhibit more than women that are just negative no matter how much you do it, probably. And so
Like
with the
violence.
term, well, I don't agree with that, because I think that there is a time and a place for violence, and that
I
is
do
the
too.
domain of
That's why.
masculinity.
Yeah, I
But
agree.
it's not having control over when is appropriate versus inappropriate to execute that level of violence is when it becomes problem, when it becomes a
See,
problem. But
that
I don't
that
think
was
that's
so
the
much more
only.
helpful to me than
Okay.
talks about. Like I know what you're talking about when you say that.
And
Yeah,
that's what
right.
I mean when I say toxic masculinity, and that's why I think we should stop using that word,
I would
because
never have
it
known that
means
until just now.
exactly. It's like gender. It's like a lot of things, I think, in the discourse these days, where it's like,
Yeah,
look, we have to settle on some definitions here, because we can't have conversations if we all mean different things.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
I'm really
Yeah,
glad that we came to that understanding of
you
each other,
explained it
though.
So
really
it's
well
an
there.
inability to regulate and discern like your use of violence.
That's
Or
at
just
least one part of what I would call
or
toxic
just yourself in
masculinity.
general. Just like it's an inability to regulate your libido. It's an inability to regulate yourself in general.
Yeah.
It's a lack of mastery over yourself. I think, lack of. I mean, it's the same thing. Like
I
like
could go with.
if like there's like if a guy's in touch with his feelings, like I as a man, I mean I do tend to I have a lot of feminine characteristics myself, and like there's certain things, man, like I swear, I mean there are certain songs and like and movies I can't even think about scenes from without tearing up. There's just things that there's things that just absolutely like get me, but at the same time it's about like not letting. No, but if you're just constantly in a state of you're just constantly weeping, constantly, then maybe you've gone a little bit too far the other way. What I'm saying? Like there's a such thing as being like being not being so stoic that you don't feel things, or you don't you really, at least you believe you don't, you repress every emotion. But there's also, and like that's the same thing. It's the same the same toxic masculinity thing. I don't know where we're going, the negative side of masculinity is whenever
Right.
men become too stoic, they become either too emotionally open or too emotionally closed off. It's all about balance. Everything is about balance. I think that maybe that is, and maybe that I didn't really think about that. Really, I don't think balance is actually as much of a feminine trait as it is a masculine trait. I think balance is it's much more important when it is being a man than it is, because I think women are it's much more, I don't know, it seems much more acceptable to me for women to have more extreme emotional reactions to things, or to have more extreme, and it just
I don't know.
it doesn't seem
Pretty extreme
unnatural to me.
reactions.
Sure, I mean I do too, but at
But
the same time, but it's about control. But it's not about losing control of it.
but it's what you do with them when you have them. For me, at
Exactly.
least.
Yeah. It's all
But
about dealing with it.
everything you described to me sounds like social or psychological norms, and they're if they're different for men or women, then you get masculine norms, feminine norms, etc. But they also vary by culture. Like the use of violence and aggression is going to be different from one culture to another as well. So if
Sure.
we're talking about just social norms, and then categorizing them or finding a taxonomy for
Yeah.
various social norms, that I understand.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's a lot
And I
to do
think,
with it.
like, to kind of to tie back to the main thesis that we're discussing here is like, well, I don't think there is such a thing as like canonically divinely masculine, because I think
Probably not.
as we evolve as a species, our conception of what is right and what is ideal evolves with us. And so we're constantly telling these stories in order to triangulate amongst
Yeah.
all of us. What is the ideal? What should a man do? What should a woman do? And that's too big of a question for any of us. So we divide it into, well, in this context, what should a man do? In this concretized context, what should a woman do? And one of my problems with a lot of the current media landscape is that we're seeing these contexts and it's like, well, all men and women, there's actually no such thing as doing the ideal thing. We're all fucked. We're all just as fallen as the lowest common denominator in our species. So we present these contexts, and then it's just kind of funny how, we don't have ideals. We don't have divine archetypes of feminine or masculine. And that to me is part of the problem, because we're abdicating our responsibility to further our understanding of the concretized ideal for both men, women, and people more generally. I don't know if that was...
No, it
No,
made
no,
perfect.
no,
We even
that
see
made any
that in
sense.
the in Greece, in the move
I'm gonna
from the
grab some
Iliad to
water.
the
I can
Odyssey,
I
from
can still hear
Achilles
you
to
guys. One
Odysseus,
second.
we see the ideal change.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. Like,
And does that mean that, like, are people intuitively or unconsciously doing it in specific situations, like they're faced with a situation or a challenge, and do they kind of instinctively think, what do I do in this situation? What would so and so do? And draw on some pattern or model, or are they just crippled to that point and they're like, I don't know what to do because I don't have any more. I don't have any efficient models.
I don't feel like I don't feel like I can say that. There has been a couple times in my life I have kind of wished like, man, I wish I had like. There's a few times in life I actually thought like I wish I did have a mentor of some sort, somebody I could go to like that. I never really had, but I don't. I can't see it really stop me in many cases or something. I don't think I really needed it. It's like sometimes it would have been nice, but I feel like for whatever reason though, it does seem like there is this need, at least in like this current generation that's coming up, like the I mean, I mean, it's a little odd to me. I mean, like I said, I really admire Jordan Peterson, but it was kind of odd to me when I thought about like, I actually really do admire him. I actually do kind of like, he's actually the kind of person. And I kind of said like, like kind of, man, suddenly the cult fandom around him, like all the men, all the people that kind of look up to him and stuff like that, kind of made a lot more sense to me all of a sudden because I hadn't really thought of it in that sense. I just admired him a lot, just like he thinks a lot like me, and so like it was really, I really appreciate seeing it, like hearing his thoughts and stuff because he makes me think, and he thinks the same way I do about things in general, like the way he works through and the way the maps of meaning stuff and all the way he dissects that and pulls it apart and like and looks at it from his angles. That's the same way I've always done things. So it's always nice, it's always it's kind of maybe a little narcissistic of it, like because I like this guy because he's a lot like me. But at the same time, but I start seeing a lot of things but I was kind of bewildered by the fact that so many people adored this man. Like, I liked him too, but the reason I liked him seemed like very different. And like, I started seeing that as the reason why that, for whatever reason, people right now, maybe it has a lot to do with like the lack of religion and spirituality. It might have a lot to do with that. It might have a lot to do with the fact that we don't have wars to fight anymore. It might have something to do with that. Like, even though like that was something that's been in society since Fight Club at least came out in like 1999. Fight Club is a really very relevant movie to this conversation. I brought it up.
I love that movie.
It's a great movie, and it actually has aged better. I've seen a lot of people like trying to tear it down and dissect it online here the last couple of years, like doing essays about the reasons why Fight Club.
Have you seen the Maggie Mae Fish one?
That's what I was thinking about. That exact one. So bad, man. And like she doesn't. No, I think she has some good essays.
80 IQ.
She has some video essays I thought were actually pretty good. That one pissed me off the whole time. I'm like, how could you even? And she like describes things like I don't know. That's something I see. It seems like, I swear to God, I see a lot more on the left than the right. I see both sides do it. Like they'll describe this exact thing about and like how this thing is bad, and they do that thing. Yeah. And like without any like counterpoints. Recently did that her video like where she goes to great lengths to explain Mott and Bailey's and then just does a Mott and Bailey. Like the whole video is a fucking Mott and Bailey, and like the whole thing is like she puts up with this obviously this obvious person that's obviously very bigoted, and then just like and then starts like J.K. Rowling behind it is so like see how they're doing the same thing, see how they're together here, and like just completely different. I hate that thing, but like she does love the Fight Club thing, but I just like but Fight Club itself. I mean, it is first of all, it's a satire, and people don't realize that a lot of times. And I do realize that maybe is a problem with the way people see it. They don't realize it's supposed to be satirical, not necessarily a comedic satirical, but satirical and just like a societal satire of like the way that men are and the way that men don't have like this. So that's what it's about. It's about the fact that there's all these men that are so desperate for any kind of meaning. They feel like they have no place, they have no identity in society, even into themselves. That they feel like they feel like they've lost their identity because they have been grouped into like this. They've been lumped into this idea of just men, men. And so like they're so desperate for anything to grab onto that they see a guy beating himself up in a parking lot and decide that, and they're like, I'll do that. They'll do anything. They'll do anything that has something, even if it's something weird and stupid. It is something that like maybe has a shred of meaning to it. And I think that I don't know. Paul Mike really did one of my most used article on Cracked actually was about Fight Club too. So it's a movie I've studied a lot, and I've watched it a ton of times. Like especially back when I was younger, I watched it. So it's one of those movies I watched over and over again. So the film, but mostly because the filmmaking, and I think the filmmaking, it's just like the camera work and everything is so amazing.
Unbelievable.
As I got older, and I started like looking at it more from the sociological perspective, man, like that movie is like says so much, and it's like, and like I think people get a little lost in the whole thing where like it becomes like a. But it's that, I mean, really, that's what if Fight Club's about anything, it's about toxic masculinity. Sorry to bring it back up. That's what it's about. It's about these people that are so desperate to figure out what masculinity means. They're so desperate to figure out and to try to embody that somewhat that they end up like forming a cult, a terrorism cult, basically, to try to tear all of society down, and so they can actually all be men again. that's the that's the whole mess of the movie. The whole movie is all tied up in this idea. You've got like Meatloaf playing like Bob with bitch tits, and like like, his whole thing is that he was a bodybuilder that did so much, that did so many steroids and everything, that it like basically just broke his whole body, and like he became obese, and like all this stuff like that. I mean, all these characters and things are all like embodying this idea of like, and like I think it's probably more relevant today than it was then.
Well, I think it's because to me that movie it's about the danger of adrift men. That to me is like that's the thesis of that movie, and it's way more relevant in 2023, that theme, than it was in 1999 from what I can tell, having been 7 years old when it came out. So I don't know if I consider myself an expert on.
I'm so old, God.
But because look, the ship of religion has been sunk for most people, and the ship of community has been sunk for most people.
Yeah.
And so we have this unbelievable proportion of men in Western society, at least, who are adrift and meaningless and searching for anything. And that movie, I think, is a great example of like, look, if people don't have community or religion or something to hold on to stay afloat, they will grasp anything that is available to them. And that could be a cult. That could be the Fight Club. And we don't want that, because that is very bad for our society. And that to me is the main meaning of that movie. And like I said, I think that's way more relevant now than it was. I don't know if I'd call that toxic masculinity, but maybe. I don't know.
Not anymore. Not after today.
Yeah.
Negative masculinity.
We've put that term to bed.
Whatever word which actually, you know what, Jeff? I might agree with you that I should stop.
You advocated for it.
You advocate for it. You did. You absolutely said that.
But at the same time of advocating, I did. I tried to make clear that like I do think it's a useful concept, but I agree with you that
concept.
If I just use a different word,
concept, I'll
give you call it everything.
Well, that's
the term gets in the way of the concept. So if you're trying
that's a great phrase. Actually, the term gets in the way of the concept. I'm going to use that, Jeff.
I like that.
That's really good. So I'm going to use negative masculinity from now on.
Okay, I probably won't fight you too much on that one.
Or maybe
I still think it's a little overly broad.
Counterproductive masculinity, something. Yeah. But I don't think that movie is necessarily about negative masculinity as much as it is about the danger of meaningless adrift. Men in particular.
I agree. I'm just saying that it just shows like the links that it can go to. Like whenever you buy into it, it's also about being ideologically possessed. It's about being becoming ideologically possessed. It's about becoming. It's about like the main character of his whole thing is that how many conversations they have in the movie about what it's like every conversation between Tyler and him that isn't about Fight Club is about what does it mean to be a man? What is that what a man looks like? Yeah. I mean, like, and it didn't when I first that movie when it came out, and I saw it, I was a projectionist when the movie came out, and I built that print and previewed it that night, and like I was just like. I went back and I went back when I wasn't working to watch that movie like 3 or 4 more times before I left the theater. And like, it didn't strike. I was just intoxicated with the filmmaking of it at the time. And now, and like looking back at it, it's like, it is so, because like, honestly, it predicted a lot of this stuff. I feel like more, I don't feel like those things were that prevalent. Palahniuk wrote that in like the early 90s. I mean, he's a gay man, and like, this is a movie that, and I still like, I can't understand how people could see that movie and think that, well, this is clearly embodying all the aspects of how bad masculinity can be and stuff like that. But it's not. It's showing the dangers of it. It's not saying that it's not saying like these are good things. These are things. It's not telling people they should go out and start fight clubs. That's the opposite of what it's saying. It's literally saying the opposite. If it was saying how good it would be if someone would just try like terrorism all the credit card companies and stuff like that. If that was the idea, then it would be. It was just like I think that there's a lot of really that's a great movie night one because like I would love to do that. I'd love to like
we should do it
because like that's a really good one. And recently of course we had the show Mr. Robot that actually takes a lot of the themes from the Fight Club and kind of copies onto itself. And where I see that. Well, it honestly it was my favorite TV show ever until the last season. And
classic.
No
one can land the plane.
I didn't know that it was that bad until I rewatched it. Like when it first came on, I actually told myself I liked it. Just total cope. I was just in a total cope state of just like, no, it was good. It was good. I'm sure it was good. And then
let's set that up. We could do it as an event. Yeah, in the Discord.
That'd be fun.
Set that up.
Yeah. And another thing I'm thinking of is archetypes they're embedded in mythology. and
Mhm.
that's where we find our meaning. And I'm so fond of saying all the time, biology matters. Well, I think mythology matters too. And when
I
you
agree.
don't have a constructive mythology, you end up with like that's the search for role models, the search for archetypes, is the search for to fulfill that mythological need that we
I
have as
absolutely
humans,
agree.
that we're
I
always going to
absolutely
have.
agree. Yeah, absolutely
Our,
agree.
our minds
It's
depend on that.
I think
Mhm.
so. Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
that's
We're
what Peterson
story-driven
Peterson
creatures.
again.
Our brains are wired for story and narrative.
I mean, that's maps of meaning all over life, right? This is the whole thing. That's like the whole thing of maps of meaning, right? It's like the entire thing is
Yeah.
about how the archetypes, like how they influence us, and like
They
how like
simplify the world for us.
Yeah,
There's
we need
much.
a new modern new mythology for
I agree, and
males for our age. That's what the men's
something I was
groups
really
in the
thinking about too.
'90s kind of tried to find. Robert Bly and Joseph Campbell
Mhm.
and that, and we need that again for this age.
I absolutely agree. I was thinking about that too. That was kind of one of the results of writing all that out and being kind of obsessed with that for a few days. That I was. I think it might have been a slight manic episode, to be honest. I might have been in a slight manic state
Well,
whenever I was obsessively researching this. But
keep it up.
it's been a while since I had one. But anyway, but I was gonna say that I think that it's something that inspired. I realized
The
that
manecdote. Sorry.
Yeah. I was gonna say that it inspired me to start thinking about writing again. That was the first time I really started thinking. That's the first thing I've written in a long time period. I mean, it wasn't much. It was just kind of a bunch of thoughts scrolled I typed it on a Word doc, but still, I mean, that's the first time I've actually sat and written. I used to write. That's all I did. That's what I did that was my life, was writing. That's all I wrote music. I worked on movie scripts. I worked on something all the time. I was always writing, and I wrote for Cracked. I did articles, stuff like that. And I hadn't really been writing in like it's like I've had some personal tragedies the last few years that really kind of like took the creative wind out of my sails, and something like doing that. It's like doing all that and everything, like it's like going through all that stuff. It made me realize like maybe there's a real purpose, like a real purpose for me to if you can recognize this sort of thing, like then I can remedy it. I can actually write something that maybe I can put something out there in the world that that can embody those things. Like it's like I said, like that's something like I just wish we saw more of a media that just shows people doing things confidently and passionately. And like you just never see characters that are just like that do something that they really love and believe in, like they're just like they're in it, and like that there's a joy to it. I take great joy in even watching a fictional show about people that just love what they're doing. They just I don't know, I find it really really like it's kind of intoxicating and it's exciting to watch. Like there's very few examples of that in media, but like that's just something I want to see a lot more.
Because there's not a lot of conflict or tension, dramatic tension in it.
But it's just fun to watch. It's fun to watch people being really like. I mean, no, there is, because like those people have to fight. Anytime you see characters doing that, they're doing something they're good at and they love. They're usually doing it against something else. There's usually a fight there. They might be doing it and because they love doing it, but there's always conflicts in the thing they're doing. There's if they're journalists or something. There's a conflict in having to get the story. There's dramatic tension in doing the thing. It doesn't have to be, the dramatic tension just has to be in like the fact that they hate themselves and hate their lives and they don't like doing this, but they have to do it, kind of thing. I just feel like there's so much of that drudgery and everything. I feel like that would be a really positive thing in general to just see for anybody growing up. I mean, honestly, like the few things that were like that growing up were actually literally inspiring to me as a person, inspiring to me as the kind of person I wanted to be. I realized that in retrospect. I didn't realize at the time, but I realized how much those things influenced me and influenced the way I wanted my life to be, and the way I try to live my life. I try to live my life in a way that makes me feel like that, and I think that if we had more examples of that in media, if we saw more things like that, I feel like it, it doesn't matter if it's like coming from the left or the right. There's so much of movies is like it's tied up in, of course, fantasy, which I mean, I love, and don't get me wrong, I love that stuff. I love superhero movies. I love sci-fi. I grew up on Star Trek and Star Wars and all the things. I really did. The first movie I remember seeing is Star Wars. I have some blasphemous opinions on what the best Star Wars movies are, but I'm not going to that.
Another day.
Yeah, another day. But beyond that, I mean, I'm 42 now. I have watched. I mean, I was at one point. I got accepted to a really prestigious film school. That was going to be what I was going to do, was go to film school, but I couldn't afford to go, so I didn't be able to do that. And I moved to Vegas. I moved to Vegas on a whim to go out and try to make a movie with this guy that lived in Vegas. He offered to let me come out there and stay with him while we developed the script and everything. I just kind of dropped everything, went and did that. So I mean, I really chased that dream for a long time, and none of it really panned out. But but I see a real value. I'm starting to see the value in it a lot more than I really did. And that, like, not trying to write. I don't ever want to. I don't think people need to put anything of an agenda. I don't think there needs to be an agenda to make sure that you're writing like these positive role model characters like that. I think it's just about like trying to embody some sort of ideals in like the stories we tell. Trying to create, like you were saying, like creating a new mythological, a canon, a new archetypes, new characters that we can look at, and we can see them as something that we can see ourselves like that. We can see ourselves like as I mean, and it's maybe not important for everybody, and it may not be important for a lot of people, but apparently it's important for somebody out there today, because like there's a lot of people talking about it, and a lot of people that seem to be literally clamoring for that, and I find that really sad. Like, I mean, like I said, it might be just the lack, like we said, like the lack of religion, lack of community, lack of family structure. There's a lot of families in general. Like, I mean, a lot of these guys just really don't feel like they have fathers. Even if their father's there, they don't feel like they have a real father, and like,
that's a big one. That filling that void of the father, I think, is at the root of this.
Yeah.
Search for mythology.
I think they're very intertwined. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have a really good, strong father figure in your life, if you have a father that really cared about you and really was there for you, and taught, and actually was like, the thing we think of as a good father, if you have that, you probably don't have that desire, that need to like, latch on to like an external figure like that to try to like.
But according to the theorists in the Mints movement, we've been losing that since the industrial age, back in the 1800s. It's been generations and generations of fathers out not in the home, and men without access to fathers.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
It's absolutely. I mean, like I had a good father. I mean, me and my dad don't necessarily get along all that well all the time. We have our conflicts. We get along well today, but we've had some ups and downs over the years. We tend to butt heads a lot of things for a lot of likes. So, but at the same time, I never could say that he was a bad father, that he ever was anything less than a good example to me. So I already had that too. And it's kind of funny that the reason my dad being such a good father, he taught me to be who I am so well that it ends up that he taught me to be independent so well that I became really independent from him and his thoughts and his ideas. So there were a lot of clashes, I'm just saying that. So he did a really good job. I mean, like, and so I don't have that. I didn't have that kind of thing where I needed to seek that kind of external, like, model. But I guess, I mean, like I've had a lot of friends growing up that like, and that they just didn't, their dads weren't there. Like they had single moms. And I mean, that most of my friends were like that. Actually, I can only think of one of my friends actually who had like a constant, strong father figure. I mean, and he was a cool guy too. But I mean, most of my other friends, I mean, like if their dad if they weren't divorced or whatever, like I think I had one friend whose dad was like a long haul trucker, and he saw his dad like for one day a month, And like, I mean, like it was just like, and if his dad was home, he was usually asleep, something. So there's a lot of people growing up that just didn't have that. They didn't have any kind of, because no matter what, even though I don't think we necessarily all need, but at least as babies, as children, you do, whether you don't think of someone as a role model, you don't think of someone as an example or whatever, or an ideal, but you do emulate what you see. You emulate, if you have a father that drinks all the time and beats your mother and stuff like that, one begets the other. It never stops. So, like the fact that we have this, in fact, in some ways, like I guess the men that didn't have the role model father or anything like that in their home at all, they had no father, probably better off than the ones that had the really negative ones. Those are the guys that really turned out to be psychopaths. So, that
was my case.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
I didn't grow up with a father, but it's a good thing that I didn't grow up with my particular father. But then I'm still trying to grow up too. So I missed out on that as well. I think men need male mentors. I think there's something that men can only get from other men, that they need that figure around.
Like women, femininity tends to need sistership, and it seems like masculinity tends to need that mentorship. Like I feel like women a lot of times they tend to gravitate more towards finding other women the same age, and like they form little like clusters and groups like that a lot more easily. I mean, I had when I was growing up, I had a pretty big group of guy friends like that too. But I seem to see that a lot more. And then when it comes to men, like really men, I think a lot of times they need a mentor of some sort. I don't know why it is, but they just do.
I'm still looking for a daddy.
But part of being a man is about doing hard things. I think it's about doing the hard thing whenever you come across a challenge, anything. It's about seeing the hard thing that has to be done and doing it. And that is not something that comes naturally necessarily. It's not the most natural thing in the world to see something that's probably going to hurt you, and you need to do it, and you do it anyway. It's just not necessarily the most natural instinct. And so, like having somebody there that you see doing that, and that you see the positive effects of it is very important. And like if it's not something that can be provided, if the helm isn't providing, then maybe that is something that that creatives like ourselves and other people can maybe contribute that in a way that puts it. The more that's out there in the world, I think the better in general. Like this media itself is so powerful, man. I mean, like look at how much the left has managed to use like so much of this stuff to like just slowly subversively take these ideas. And like, I mean, I think that's a lot of the shame that comes like associated with masculinity comes from the media, comes from the fact that there's so many portrayals of men. It's all about like how the men are bad men, and like, and how the way the things that they like are bad, the things they want to do are bad. And like, what do you get from that? You get Andrew Tate. That's what you get. You get some cartoon character like
that's why men need to come together and support each other right now and counter that.
Yeah, I agree.
I hear this all the time in my men's group, that like how men are being portrayed and stigmatized in society, and how hard it is to just exist as a man right now with all the negative stereotypes.
Because there literally isn't you can't win. You cannot win in like that larger sense of society. You cannot win as a man, because if you are this way, then you're the toxic masculinity, which we're not going to use that anymore. We're saying that's what they say, that that you're toxic. And if you're the other way, then you're a pussy. Right? Or they use, much worse or much more hurtful terms and stuff like that. I mean, words don't bother me, but they bother a lot of people. A lot of people hear that stuff. You hear my friends used to joke around with me so much once again. They just make so many jokes about like, they're just like just way guys were back then, like, oh, you faggot, you dig, like shit like that. Doesn't mean so much. Like, I actually got quite once, but I mean, it never bothered me. But at the same time, I did get to a point where I was like, I'd actually ask myself like, and I was like, wait a second, I'm not attracted to men, so it's pretty easy to answer. But so like, it can affect you. It can affect you over time. You hear something enough, and you start, well, what I think what we saying so much was it true, and so like you hear so much as a man, I think growing up these days, that if you're attracted to a woman, and you touch her the wrong way or something. I'm not saying that you shouldn't touch people, you shouldn't inappropriately do, but I mean, if you just accidentally do the wrong thing, then you're a rapist, you're a sexual abuser, you're this or that. You have so many pitfalls that you have to navigate, and to the point where men just kind of like I think they feel scared. In general, I mean, it literally has emasculated them. They've been literally emasculated, and then now they're emasculated. Now that they got emasculated, now everyone just points at them and laughs and says, like, "Look how emasculated you are! Look what a little bitch you are! You're just a little bitch, aren't you? You don't know anything. You're not a man. You're not a man. It's like a stereotype you've seen in so many movies, like of like a guy that like a guy that has like he can't get it up or something like that. Like the woman's like, you're not a man. If you're a man, you could fuck me, kind of thing. It's like that kind of thing really happens. I've known people it's happened to. It's bizarre. Like it's like like what the hell is that? Like you try to make everybody happy. In just general as a person, you're trying to fulfill these like societal ideas, and no matter what you do, damned if you do, damned if you don't, and the only way to combat that, I think, is just for people that are able to like rise above it, to just show that as much as you can to try to create things that that way, because at least through art and through creation we can kind of propagate the ideas more, but get out there more in front of more people, because you can only know.
Yes, you find your people and they're out there. Y'all can contact me if I have several groups you can be part of, and know yourself. Like the more you know who you are, the less vulnerable to that you become.
Absolutely. Yeah,
absolutely. This has been a really, really good conversation.
It sure has.
I'm sad we didn't. Can we touch on Joe Rogan real quick?
Oh, absolutely.
No, to me, it's like
I'm not trying to go anything.
When you're talking about examples, I don't have that much longer. But when you're talking about examples of real life, especially like public figures, the first one that jumps out to my mind, even I think Jordan Peterson is a really great example of positive masculinity, but even more so to me than that, and I have my problems with Joe Rogan and his perspective, but I think in terms of how he embodies masculinity, it's like of the people who are in the public right now, I think he's probably the best example that I know of.
I agree. I agree.
Like if I was to show my son, it's like, how do you be a man in the world? It's like, well, that's a pretty good example. That's a pretty damn
What
good
are the
example.
qualities that Joe exhibits that
he can't be shamed?
I don't follow him. I just know he's a host of Fear Factor, so I don't know. I know very little about it.
I love news radio too, so like I've been a fan for a long time.
I've never actually watched that. Maybe I should.
News radio is great. Phil Hartman, man. It's got Phil Hartman. It's got Phil Hartman, Andy Dick, Dave Foley.
Oh, Andy Dick.
Before he went crazy. Yeah.
Poor guy. He's lost.
He's always been kind of. Anyway, what are the qualities of Joe Rogan that draw you to?
That's a good question. Definitely one of the things that we touched on earlier is he cannot be shamed.
Yeah.
Like he is unapologetically who he is. He believes
There's
unapologetically what he believes. There's like extreme authenticity and a non-apologetic nature of him acknowledging what he values. I think there's kind of like radical camaraderie, maybe is one way I'd put it. Like he's just out there to be friends with like maybe not anyone, because he's pretty antagonistic to people that he believes, or he can be pretty antagonistic to people he considers himself to be opposed to, which I would also consider an element of masculinity. I think a lot of that goes back to the question of like, okay, well, what are masculine traits? And that is a question that I don't necessarily find easy to articulate.
I think having role models helps to articulate, like having individual models to draw from.
I think he engages with the world outside of himself. Like I think the fact he goes out bow hunting and stuff like that, I'm like, that's masculine behavior. He's engaging in the natural world and showing a mastery of it. That to me, that's masculine behavior. He knows how to fight. He's very intimately familiar with physical conflict. That he has a mastery of that. That's masculine behavior, I would consider.
He's very open to learning too, which I think is another big.
Very open to learning. Very open, like perspectively.
I think men should always be trained to learn new things and learn, and he's always doing that. And I think that's really, really admirable.
I'd say that about anybody, but
well, that actually is a good that's a good point, because I was gonna say I don't know if that's more masculine than feminine, because I would say strong feminine energy is also very open to learning and teaching. I think that is one of the middle parts of the Venn diagram. But I would say bow hunting a deer is not feminine behavior.
Yeah. That's what I mean. I mean, like learning to do new skills. Like men are tend to be like trying to learn new skills, and when you see something that you don't know
further mastery.
Problem solving.
Okay.
Basically, problem solving. Learning. If you have a problem,
non-interpersonal problem solving is probably the way I would delineate it.
Like no matter what. Like I grew up being a handyman, not very much, but as I've gotten older, you just learn to fix things.
Yep,
you learn to fix things, and like it's just like something like you have something that's broken in your house. I'm not going to hire somebody to fix like that little tiny, like a shelf breaks or something like that. You teach yourself to fix it because you didn't know before, but instead of like just sitting there and letting it be broken, you fix the thing. That's what I mean by it. Like be constantly learning, and I think he does. He's always open to new ideas and stuff too. But it seems like he's always talking about something new he's doing. I think it's really. I think that is like there's a lot of things. I think the only reason I didn't include him in the list before too is I think when I really thought about it after you asked the question, the thing, I was like, fuck it, like really, it kind of bugged me. Like I mean, my reasons were there, but at the same time, I didn't really feel strongly about them anymore. And I think a lot of it is, honestly, and this is dumb, it's a really dumb thing, but it's because the only time I ever see him is in that podcast studio.
Yeah,
it's like it's the fact that like I see him so much as like he's like to me like that podcast studio is like a part of him. It's like he's part of like this frame, that's like the Joe Rogan frame, the Joe Rogan shot, and I see that same shot so much, and I realized that was something that like I see that's the difference between him and like a Rogan, like Peterson, for example. I've seen Peterson in so many different situations and things in so many different contexts. That's the reason why I feel so confidently about that. It's like it's a very from my perspective, a very three-dimensional, well-rounded person. Where it's a lot of the other figures like they're just very two-dimensional to me because you only see them in this one context where they're sitting from a certain angle on a camera, and that is by no means, that should not disqualify them. I realize I'm saying it's kind of a shallowness on my part, like. The same way, like I saw some YouTube the other day that I turned their video on, and then like about after I turned it off after like 5 seconds because the guy had like a nose ring and he was like in his 30s, and I was like, I mean, I don't know, but not like just like a stud, he had like the whole ring thing. It was like a Joan Osborne nose ring.
Was that masculine?
No, it wasn't even that. It was like I couldn't take him seriously. I couldn't listen to the guy just say, "But that's all nose ring." I just like. I mean, I'm admitting that my shallowness on my part. I'm not saying that's a good thing. There
probably is a visual element to it on some level. of our
It was.
brain.
It had nothing to do with masculine. It wasn't masculine. It was just like I can't take that person seriously because it was about. It was a very serious subject. It was like it was a video about like it was a video about theology in some sense, some kind of theological thing. And I was like, I'm not going to take this guy seriously in theology. He's got this freaking giant
He has
ass
a
nose
nose
ring.
ring.
It's a big one too. Like it's like the Joan Osborne. You know, like the you know what I mean with Joan Osborne. The God was one of us. You don't know that song? Okay.
I know that song.
I'm
Oh yeah, from
I don't. I
what's her
don't know
face?
the.
you know, there's a famous video and like
Joan somebody.
Joan Osborne, yeah. It's the music video for it was kind of was a big thing.
It's iconic.
Growing up. Yeah,
Okay.
kind of. If you look it up, I mean, but you look it up, the first thing you'll see is like the nose ring of no, I mean, it's just this giant ass nose ring. It just looks like it sticks. That's the only thing you really remember from her face.
Oh, Gomez. Yeah.
Is there an element of masculine behavior that has to do with like an appropriate level of dedication towards aesthetic? Because it feels to me like you can get away with in a feminine mindset, there is a higher degree of concern with aesthetic than there is in a masculine mindset. Would you guys agree with that?
I would bump that
I
to
would agree,
you
yeah.
because I would trust your opinion on that way more than mine. I have no sense.
Well, I don't.
Are you still trying for the stash?
Yeah,
the little Hitler
apparently.
stash?
Well, it's not a Hitler stash. It goes all the way.
No, you were going to dye the brows and
Oh
see.
yeah. No, I'm not gonna do the Hitler stash. I do this mustache though because I'm making a new project called Junior JP. It's my comedy rap project, which is I mentioned the Fanny Pack song and the you heard the Get Healthy song that I put out.
Yeah, that's the one I was trying to think
Yeah.
of. That was
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
I love the music.
Oh, thanks, man. I think it's awesome. So I'm gonna do some pictures with this mustache, and this is the character known as Junior JP, and I'm gonna shave it and go back to being John/Bridges again.
All right, well, it's a good look, man.
Thanks, man. But no, what I'm saying is like you look at someone like Joe Rogan, and he clearly like he doesn't look disheveled or unkempt, but he's not concerned aesthetically, particularly as like a woman or a feminine person to try and they'd be more concerned with the way that they're interpreted visually, I think.
Oh, so is lack of that masculinity? I definitely have the lack of that.
Because I think it's hard to like lay out precisely, and I have an engineering background, and so I'm always trying to think of things mathematically, and that gets in my way a lot of times with these kinds of concepts. But because I don't think it's a concrete level of how much do I care? How do I care 10 units or 20 units? But I think it's whatever the limit is for the masculine concern about aesthetic, it is necessarily diminished in comparison to the feminine, the amount that a feminine mindset
I think it's this.
values aesthetic.
I think I can answer that. I think it's that with women, it has a lot more to do with what they wear and like the things they wear, the actual choices they make with what they wear. I think men is much more about how they wear it. I think a man can can get away with wearing just like the basic black t-shirt and jeans kind of thing, and they wear it like Rogan does a lot of times, and they wear it confident, and they wear it. It just fits them so much that it's just like you're like that dude looks badass, You can just see that kind of energy, and then you can see like a Jordan Peterson thing where he has some like suits and stuff sometimes. And I'm just like they're almost so over the top. Sometimes they're a little bit ridiculous, but I'm just like space, man. I just look at it. It's sick, I can appreciate both sides of it, but I mean clearly there's thought put into it. But at the same time, it's like at the same time, it doesn't necessarily look like he spent a bunch of time doing makeup and crimping and everything, and it doesn't look like he's necessarily plucked all his eyebrows or whatever. I think there's something wrong with it. I admire somebody who can pull off a good aesthetic, as someone who hasn't really been able to do so much of my life. I've had my troubles with trying to look a certain way or something like that. I used to be a lot pretty overweight. I've lost a lot of weight, but anyway, so I'm a lot more comfortable with my body now than I used to be. But so as someone who's struggled with that a long time, I certainly admire that. But I don't think it's necessarily masculine. I think it's more about. I think once again, it comes that really falls under the category of confidence when it comes to men. I think women's confidence and their thing has a lot to do with the makeup and the whole presentation they put together. I think with men, as long as they're comfortable, they're confident in what they're wearing, it doesn't really matter what it is.
Yeah, for me, it's comfort. It's lack of self-consciousness too. I don't want to think or worry about all that.
I guess my question, maybe I phrased it not clearly, is there a point at which you can care so much about how you are aesthetically interpreted or put as much value where it diminishes the level of masculinity?
No, I think you can. I think you can, but I think I don't know. I think it's much more the self consciousness, though. I mean, I like once again, like Peterson's wore some suits. I've seen on some interviews sometimes. Like I was like, I mean, like it was some elaborate get up he had on. At the same time, he wears it confidently and well enough that it doesn't come across as unmasculine to me. I've seen a lot of other people wear like someone more like Milo. Yeah, Yiannopoulos.
Like that kind of stops being masculine.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think
opinion.
of him as that masculine to begin with.
He's
well,
not.
I agree, and I think that's part of it.
Yeah, it's part
is
of
kind
it,
of my point.
The flashy kind of like just like flat, like whenever it looks like you're clearly, if it looks like you're trying to look good, that's one thing. When you're trying to look like you're trying to get people to notice you, I think it's another thing. You know, when you're dressed in a way that you're trying to look at me kind of thing. I think that tends to be like the, you know, like here's a
thought.
Different kinds of attention too.
Did you say intention? Because that's where my mind went. Is like, okay, maybe this is one way to look at it.
Intention,
it's like it's about whether the person is wearing something or the intention of their choice of attire, or even like in terms of makeup or hair or anything. If the intention is for how they look at themselves or see themselves versus how they want to be seen by others. Is that kind of one of the differences where it's like it's masculine to want to wear something or do this because this is how I want to see myself, and maybe it's more feminine. And not saying this is a bad or good thing, and I don't even know if I agree with this as I say it, but is it more of a feminine thing to say, well, this is how I want to be interpreted by other people?
No, I think you got. I think
is that?
I think that's.
What do you think, Jeff? You look like you don't agree.
Oh no, I don't think I should have an opinion on this at all because I don't know enough about aesthetics or fashion. But for me, it could be that, but that's hard to tell visually from just looking. What's easier to tell is the confidence thing.
Totally, I agree.
It kind of communicates one's level of confidence by how much.
I mean, I can look.
They take over.
You can take one look at somebody. You take one look at somebody and tell if they're comfortable with what they're wearing, or just they're comfortable in their skin at that time. Forget about their clothes. Just like you just, I mean, I guess like the same person should technically be able to be pretty much just as comfortable naked. You know, like at the same time, like if they're wearing what they want, if you tell if they're wearing what they want, they're not. If you can tell they're not concerned with how other people are looking at them.
Right.
You know, they're concerned with how they're projecting, not what's being projected onto them. Right.
Right.
It's about what you project, not what gets projected onto you. I think that's a big part of it because a lot of people. I used to wear weird things when I was a kid, and so like when I was 15, 16, I went through around not 16, but 14, 15. I went through like a phase where I was like, I used to wear goofy hats and stuff like that in public and stuff like that, and it wasn't really about attention. It was just because fuck you, I can wear it if I want to. It was like it was very, but that was my thing. It wasn't like I wasn't trying to get people to look at me, and a lot of people thought it was like an attention seeking.
Would you consider that masculine behavior?
I mean, as a boy when I was doing it, like it wasn't masculine, but I think it was like pre-masculine. You know, I was learning masculinity without even knowing it. I mean, it ultimately that kind of thing became a big part of who I became later on. Whenever I, it wasn't necessarily about wearing weird things or something, but just like I've ever since I've been like me and my wife been together. You're in the store or something. There's guys that literally will feel insecure and like almost like they feel like they've been emasculated if they hold a purse. Like my wife can hand me her purse and I'll take it, and it just doesn't. You can tell the difference. You tell a guy that's like holding his wife's purse. That's what they're doing. They're holding wife's purse, and a guy's just holding his wife's purse. It's that difference. It's the difference between somebody who's just like there's a difference between a guy who's wearing a suit and a guy who's just wearing a suit.
Who's in a suit.
Yeah, who's in a suit or a suit's wearing him or whatever they want to say. Yeah. But, it's like there's a big difference between like those kind of things, and I think there's a really interesting thing because there's a really kind of a metaphorical almost like aspect of that of like like the clothes make it the man kind of like thing that that phrase we heard. Like there's almost something to that of like using clothes almost as like a as a concept you can kind of see as a way to kind of explain their things, because like your clothes is just how you present yourself to the world, right? So and a lot of it has to do with just how you present yourself to the world, and I think that maybe that's a big part of it is like the whole thing. So like what you project and not what's projected onto you. If all you're concerned about is what the energy you're putting out there, and you're not concerned about how people are receiving it per se, I mean, maybe there's times where you do want people to receive it a certain way because like you're trying to impart something important or something that you care about, but at the same time it's not about, but you're not doing it because so people will like you or whatever, you're doing what you think is right and good in according to your worldview. And I think, and like the last point I'll actually make, this is the last masculine aspect that I think that maybe this is probably once again, it's something that applies to women as well. But I think that it's different for men. It's just different for boys than it's for girls. I think that it's really important for men. And one thing I feel very strongly about is that one very masculine is that men have a very strong and very believed in worldview. They have a very strong perspective. like everything they do should have like a perspective to it. It shouldn't. They should never be exactly passive, I guess is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like they should have a stance, a viewpoint from which they see the world. Like I think a lot of people these days just don't have that. I mean, I think everybody in this room obviously does, but it just generally you don't see a lot of. You don't see people that actually haven't like some. I don't like the term ideology, but like they have an ideal they're trying to live up to. They do have things that they believe in, and I think believing in something is so important, and it's just becoming rare. That's all. That's probably. I think that pretty much brings us through everything. Everything like I wrote the essay now. Like pretty much like that was like the last.
You've written 4 or 5 of them since we've been talking.
Right.
I was a punk growing up, like in my 20s and stuff. But that was a masculine look to me. Like
it is, and it can be. I mean,
I did it for self-expression and aesthetic reasons, but not necessarily to communicate masculinity. But I think it did. I feel manly now. I feel more manly after having this conversation. I'm much more inspired in my masculinity.
Right.
I think we should do this. I think we should have a future. I don't know, maybe even a couple. I think there's a lot more to discuss here. I really do. I think maybe we bring some other people on too.
Well, we have a men's group. We meet every Monday too.
I just mean as a stream, I think it'd be a useful stream to have out there. I think it would be. I mean, really, this is the kind of conversation that people don't have. I mean, the more I've been sitting here thinking about it, like besides like some of the few examples we've known to come up with, like talking about like movies like Fight Club and stuff like that, just masculinity as a topic it's not discussed in this way very much at all. Like at least not whenever people talk a lot about what's negative about it, but a lot of people talk about what's positive and what we can do to try to like embody that better. I just think that's a really useful and important concept, and I hope we'll get able to do that again soon. I really do. I know. Did anybody even like it? Is anybody even watching this? Are 30 people
I saw Dolbez was in the chat.
Dolbez is here.
Hey, what's up, Dolbez? I wasn't sure when I saw his message. I was like, oh, did he type that like a half hour ago? And he's going.
I can't see the chat or anything, so I have no idea.
Yeah.
John, do you have anything you want to wrap up with?
A thought came to my mind that I wanted to kind of touch on. Hopefully, this won't take more than 30 seconds or 5 hours.
I could do this all day.
I like what you said.
I'm so into this. So
because you mentioned how so much of modern representations of masculinity have to do with what is negative about it versus what is positive, and that to me brought to mind the idea of a positive. Oh fuck! What's the actual quote? The idea that you see from a lot of, I guess, postmodernists, but especially Marxists, that a positive concept of the utopia cannot be articulated. It's a matter of negative thinking. It's about stripping away what is negative, and the ideal will be revealed. And it's taking for granted that which is working. And you see that on a societal level where it's like, look, if we got one example I go to often is like, well, let's abolish the police. It's like, why should we do that? Well, because peaceful coexistence in a society is a given. That's a positive thing we have, but that's just the natural state. And if we strip away the negative, which is some of the bad behavior of police, which obviously exists, but we strip that away, the utopia will be further revealed. It's buried under, it's almost like alchemical in a way. It's like, look, we have this mundane lead. If we strip away, we'll reveal the gold inside.
Yeah.
And so to me, that brought to mind, it's like, okay, well, we have these behavioral patterns of men and women in the world. We look at the negative. Well, if we just can strip away the negative of how these people act, the positive is just a given, and that will be revealed. And the perfect man, the perfect woman, or actually, according to these people, the perfect human, because that actually doesn't exist. Yeah. The perfect human will emerge. And so we need to just focus on the negative. It's all about identifying the negative, because if we can strip that away, then the positive is just, it's always going to be there. It's just a given. That was the last thing that I wanted to kind of point out. But yeah, I really appreciate this conversation. I think this is a really good topic.
What would emerge? Like what would emerge?
That's the idea of the communist utopia in a lot of ways, and that's kind of the Marxian idea. Is that?
But as far as masculinity and males, what do you think would emerge? Is it just the positive qualities we've been talking about?
I guess I don't. I guess so.
Well, that's the problem with that whole system, though. The whole system,
maybe you're right.
It's the whole system. It's like the whole thing. It's like they want to tear these things down, right? They don't have anything. They don't have anything to replace it with, though. They have this idea that if
communism doesn't know how.
If you tear all this stuff down, you tear down the police, you tear down men, you tear down whatever the thing is, you tear down the concept of gender and sex, you tear all these things down, but like then what do you replace it with? Well, you don't have to replace it. It's just so basically like they just want to see the world burn, whether they realize it or not. It's not even like I don't think they think that way. I don't think they consciously think, oh well, really all I want is to destroy everything. But that's really all. That's all their goal is, because it's like we all know. I mean, everybody in this chat does anyway, or the stream does. We all know that socialism is a stupid, dumb idea that will never work, because it requires everybody to just be on their best behavior all the time and never have any selfish ideas or actions or anything, and everybody's just going to be good. And no one's ever going to have it. No one's ever anything bad, because there's nothing telling you that you're bad, so you'll never be bad and all this stuff like that. And it's just it's a freaking fantasy.
It's a fairy tale.
It's a fairy tale fantasy. It's like this idea of like heaven or whatever, like this conception of, and it's just not going to happen. At least if it's possible, it's not going to happen in this realm and not in this dimension, not in our world. Like there are people out there, as long as there are people that are starving, as long as there are people that, and guess what? Those things tended to have. They tend to have a lot of starving people. You can't have something like socialism without intense authoritarianism and to keep it in line. It's just impossible. Even then, it'll always break and fall apart, because people will never be truly motivated to do the things they have to do. And it's just a ridiculous idea, but that's all they want to do. They just want to tear down. It's like you identify, it's the throwing the baby up the bathwater thing. It's not necessarily a new concept, but it's the truth. Like what happens is that these, they see something really negative, something that definitely is affected, because men have raped women, and because men have done this, and men have been misogynistic, and men have been violent. And so like the thing to do is instead of like saying like, maybe we should try to like temper that some, like instead like they introduce all this like complete opposite things of just like saying like, well, just get rid of those things entirely. We need all those things, but there is nothing that doesn't exist on a spectrum. Like violence itself can be good. Hatred and anger can be good. I mean, like the word hate itself might be turned up. It might be the same thing like anger turned up to an extreme degree, and like maybe that's where it becomes bad. But anger is an important thing. There are things that should make you angry. There are things that should make you sad. Like there's nothing wrong with being sad. There's nothing wrong with being, and nothing wrong with being happy. I mean, that's the reason why I don't agree with Stoicism. Like, Stoicism is just like, Stoicism and its extremes just like turns into an emotion.
Well, I would make the exact point to you in that case. Like, there's nothing wrong with being stoic in the same way there's nothing wrong with being sad. It's pushed to excess is when it becomes bad. But it's just funny to hear that one after another.
I know, you're right. Well, I think of Stoicism more as the philosophy that more than as an emotion or an emotional state. I always think of more of like the terms of like the
well, but even so, a little bit of Stoicism is good.
No,
the same way a little bit of sadness.
Absolutely.
Up to a point. I know that they're conceptually they do diverge a little bit, but
when I hear the term stoic, I think of like the stoic hero, like that never smiles and never does anything, and just like their whole thing is very serious and But
you could make the same argument for when I think of a sad person, I think of someone who's broken down, completely useless to anyone else and themselves, and that was my point.
No, you're right.
I want to address the question that Jeff asked. Because I'm really puzzling over that. It's like, what would, by criticizing the negatives about masculinity, what are they hoping would remain? What are the
I think they're trying to liberate the feminine in the masculine. Because all they're trying to tear down is the masculine. They don't seem to be targeting the feminine at all. That's why I think it's a feminist.
Like the prioritization of like the protection of women and children. Like that's a masculine trait. And I think that's one thing they'd probably want to keep. That was one of the things that, because I was searching.
I don't know. What about this? I don't need a man.
Maybe they want men to fight the wars. Like when the bad guys come, the masculine, ability, or like the male more ability, but the masculine urge to.
I don't know. I don't think they're going to be happy with anything masculine.
Maybe you might be right. You might be right. I'm not sure.
I mean, they do want to use this as chattel for their wars, though. I mean, they do. Men are. I mean, like they don't. But see, that's the part of it. That's the reason why it's okay to be masculine in war, because you're not around society, right? Like that's the reason why there's that perception, like you're one person in war. That's the reason why I'm saying like the war movies tend to be a little like weird for me to like think of as like good examples of masculinity, just because they're so far removed from real life and so far removed from. There's just this concept of like, once again, that's like it's the thing in Fight Club, like we have no great war. Our war is a spiritual war, So they say it is in the movie, and I just think that's a really like it is very true. Like whenever we're in war, it's like that's the whole place where it's okay, and then men go too far. They become they go into war, and they horrible atrocities get committed and stuff. Like horrible things happen. Like we've all seen various Vietnam films. I'm sure we've all seen like portraying all the horrors of war and stuff like that. And like I think those are you know, there's plenty of good portrayals of war in men in war movies too. I mean, but I'm just saying that I we really don't have. I lost the plot, man. I lost the thread there. We've gotten really lost in terms of like where we see these things, where we see like with like this is okay. Like what we need to say is just like it's okay to feel these ways. Just try to control it. Just try to control, not try to stop your emotions. Just control your emotions. Just like just. There's nothing wrong.
I would
with
say
being
Well,
because
I wouldn't say
because you
control. I
want
don't
to,
think you
or
can
you
control
think you
your
should
emotions.
do it, not because women want you to. I don't live my life by what women want.
Oh no, that's what I meant either. I just meant it's just in generally it's just a good. I mean, it's not good for you if you feel like your emotions are in control. If you're punching walls in your apartment or something like that, it's probably not a good thing. It's probably good for the walls and not
Yeah,
for your hand.
but I'm
you know?
not.
I know.
I'm not punching walls, but if I
Yeah.
were, I would stop because I thought it was a good
No,
thing. Like
that's my point.
I'm very
Yeah.
self-determination. I would have to determine that it's something I need to change because it would improve me as a person, not because there's a woman around that doesn't think I should punch walls.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't.
Intrinsic
agree more.
motivation.
We should not be. I mean, in general, like there's nothing less masculine than doing things because you think it'll make other people happy. Really, doing things strictly to please everyone else around you. That's just like that's not a very masculine ideal. It's really about doing the right thing and the thing that you believe in because you know it's right, not because it's going to please everyone. You know,
Yeah.
that's probably my biggest part of it. It really is the biggest.
And
thing
I
about
think
it.
figuring out what's right is part of that masculine ideal, like that ability to know what's right or what's best in a situation.
Developing your worldview. Yeah.
One of the things that you said about the worldview thing, Chris, the way I wrote it down was like I'm making kind of like a short list of like, well, these are the things that a masculine archetype does, and one of the things is he knows where he stands.
Yeah.
And I think that that's like a decent way of articulating your point about having a worldview. It's like, agree with it or not, he's got a conception of what his I guess you could say principles are, but I like the way that I phrase it there. It's like he knows where he stands.
I agree.
And that I don't think, and once again, I kind of fear distinctifying, if that's a word, but you know what I mean, feminine behavior from masculine behavior, because I think that if some people would hear me say that or watch me say that and like take offense to that, because I feel like that is more of a masculine thing than a feminine thing to like have that kind of worldview, to know where you stand. And I don't want that to come across as saying that women don't know where they stand. That's certainly not what I mean. And I think you guys get more what I'm trying to articulate when I say it that way.
That goes back to the thing where you talked about which
I gotta
external.
go.
Oh, you gotta go. Okay. Well,
Thanks, John. This
was so much fun, guys. Really appreciate
We'll
the
do it
conversation.
again. Thanks.
Sounds good. All right.
Dolbez has a
Thanks,
comment.
Dolbez.
I don't
do you
care
think?
if I'm feminine or masculine. I just want to be my true and whole self. If that leans toward femininity, then I don't care. If it leans toward masculinity, then so be it.
That's as masculine as you can be then. Face.
I love that.
All right.
Well, too bad. It's masculine anyways.
That is
No, that's
masculine,
awesome.
Dolbez.
That's
That's a masculine stance to take.
Maybe. All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching, Dolbez. I'll talk to y'all soon. All right.
I'll see you in
Peace.
church.
Yeah.
I guess
yeah.
we can
See you
we
tomorrow.
can call it.
All right.
See you
All
guys.
right.